Welcome back to the channel. Have you ever wondered if destiny is real? If two parallel lines, after decades apart, could somehow intersect at an unexpected point? Our story today begins in Los Angeles, the city of angels, and also a place that hides countless secrets. In luxurious Beverly Hills, a young millionaire is searching for a new chef for his mansion. Meanwhile, more than an hour's bus ride away, a 55-year-old woman named Sarah is struggling with her daily meals and the agonizing pain of a past she has never gotten over. She gets the job, a life-changing opportunity. But she has no idea that the wealthy man she is about to serve is the very son she was forced to give up 35 years ago. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. There are stories, no matter how painful, that must be told. And this is their story. The sun had barely risen over Los Angeles, its golden light illuminating the sprawling freeways connecting the suburbs to the elegant streets of Beverly Hills. Sarah Johnson, 55, stepped out of her small house with a lump in her throat and a faint, forced smile on her face. She said goodbye to her youngest daughter, Chloe, who at 20 was already working part-time at a local diner. As she locked the door, Sarah glanced for a moment at the peeling paint and remembered that, despite their struggles, this home was her sanctuary. However, life was pushing her to take a step as big as it was uncertain. She had just landed a job as a chef in the mansion of a wealthy entrepreneur. She walked a few blocks to the main boulevard, where she boarded a crowded city bus. She sat by the window with her purse on her lap and, almost unconsciously, caressed a small, worn photograph. In the photo, the silhouette of a baby in her arms was barely visible. It evoked memories that still made her tremble. A public hospital, a social worker, and the most difficult decision she ever had to make as a very young woman, when she didn't have a penny to support a newborn. A part of her had never forgiven herself, even though she knew she had no other choice at the time. The journey took over an hour, and when Sarah finally got off the bus, she found herself in front of tall buildings and clean streets. Beverly Hills was another world: luxury boutiques, international restaurants, and a constant flow of expensive cars. Her heart pounded as she looked for the mansion's address on the piece of paper she carried. When she located an imposing wrought iron gate and fine stone walls, she knew she had arrived. With trembling hands, she pressed the buzzer. "Yes? Who is it?" a female voice said through the intercom. "Good morning. I'm Sarah Johnson, the new chef," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. The gate opened, and on the other side, a wide driveway awaited her. She walked with a steady pace and saw a woman approaching. She introduced herself as Isabella, the head housekeeper, a woman of about 45 with a gentle voice and curious eyes. She wore an impeccable hairstyle and a crisp uniform, reflecting the high standards of the family she worked for. "Welcome, Sarah. This way, please. Mr. Hayes is waiting for you to finalize the details," Isabella said with a friendly smile. Sarah discreetly smoothed her graying hair and followed Isabella through a pristine garden filled with seasonal flowers and perfectly trimmed shrubs. As she walked, she noticed the mansion's elegant architecture: large windows, marble finishes, and details that spoke of refined taste. They entered the main foyer, where a large chandelier hung from the ceiling and the steps of the central staircase looked freshly polished. Amidst all that luxury, Sarah felt small, but she promised herself she would do a good job to keep this much-needed employment. Isabella led her to the kitchen, a spacious area with state-of-the-art appliances and a large marble island. The contrast with the modest gas stove in Sarah's house was overwhelming. However, Sarah's eyes lit up as she imagined the possibilities. There were utensils she had never used before, imported spices, and all kinds of fresh ingredients. "Mr. Hayes will be here later. In the meantime, I want you to get familiar with the kitchen and meet the other staff. They'll help you get settled," Isabella explained, reviewing a list of daily menus. "Today, you need to prepare lunch for the executives coming to a meeting with Mr. Hayes." "Of course, thank you, Miss Isabella," Sarah replied with a slight nod. The housekeeper left, and Sarah took the opportunity to explore every corner of the kitchen. She observed the gleaming stainless steel pots, the perfectly aligned knives, and the large pantry filled with exotic ingredients. However, she also noticed the absence of some typical elements she always used. Certain traditional herbs, cornmeal for cornbread, or even the specific spices for a proper barbecue rub. She felt an impulse to bring a bit of her own identity to this modern space. Just then, footsteps were heard, and a tall man of about 35 appeared, with dark brown hair and an elegant demeanor. He wore a navy blue suit, and despite his serious appearance, he had a calm expression. Sarah knew immediately that he was Ethan Hayes, the head of the house. He stopped at the kitchen doorway and looked at her for a second with a certain curiosity. "Good morning. You must be the new chef, Mrs. Johnson, correct?" he said in a polite, though somewhat reserved tone. "Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'll do my best to ensure you're satisfied with my work," Sarah replied, trying to maintain her composure. For a moment, a strange sensation washed over her. This man, with whom she was exchanging just a few words, caused a knot in her stomach. She perceived something familiar in the way he moved his shoulders and in the slight gesture he made when he smiled shyly. She chided herself. No, don't think things that aren't there. Hiding her nervousness, she listened attentively to his instructions about the meal expected that day. "I want something classic, but with a modern touch," Ethan said. "Our meeting today is key, so the food should reflect the style of this house, elegant but with American roots." Sarah nodded silently, making a mental inventory of what she could cook. As he walked away down the hall, she caught a glimpse of a small object shining in his jacket pocket. It looked like an old medallion, like a family heirloom. She felt a chill but quickly focused on her task list. After the brief introduction, Sarah's first day was spent among pots and pans. She prepared a menu starting with a creamy tomato soup and, for the main course, slow-cooked beef brisket with a slight gourmet twist. In the distance, she heard fragments of conversations Ethan was having on the phone about business and high-level meetings. She told herself that this life was completely foreign to hers, or so she thought. However, the pang in her chest every time she saw Ethan peek into the kitchen wasn't normal. There was a connection she couldn't explain. At the end of the afternoon, while cleaning the last pot, Sarah received praise from Isabella. Mr. Hayes was very pleased with the meal. He said it had a real homemade taste. Sarah smiled with a relief that went beyond the professional. She felt that this first step, though filled with anxiety, was bringing her closer to a destiny she was beginning to suspect. However, she remained silent, afraid to admit to anyone, not even herself, the possibility that this wealthy mansion held a secret she had longed to confront her entire life. The next morning began with the chirping of birds perched in the lush trees of the garden. Sarah woke before dawn, accustomed to her usual schedule, and went to the kitchen to start organizing breakfast. It was still dark, but she preferred to work in silence to have the table ready when the rest of the staff arrived. She felt a tingle of excitement. Her first day had gone well, but she still wasn't used to a place so different from her home on the outskirts of the city. While checking the pantry, she noticed that some key spices and cornmeal were not available. She jotted down what she needed for the week in a small notebook, though she didn't know if Ethan would approve of these extra ingredients. She was convinced that including authentic flavors, as her mother had taught her, would add a special touch to her dishes. At 7 a.m. sharp, she heard Isabella's voice. The housekeeper, always punctual, came to the kitchen to review the day's menu. "Sarah, good morning, Mr. Hayes just notified us that there will be a special dinner tonight. It seems he wants to invite some potential investors. Business partners and colleagues will be coming." Sarah, still wearing her apron and holding a bag of freshly baked biscuits, felt a slight chill. She barely knew the dynamics of the house and was already facing another major culinary challenge. "Does he want me to prepare a particular menu?" Sarah asked, her voice steady, though internally she was filled with apprehension. "Well, he said it should be traditional American with an elegant twist. I think he liked your proposal from last night and wants a similar style, but for more guests," Isabella explained. Then she frowned. "He also suggested that shellfish be added to one of the dishes, but I don't know. He himself has a certain intolerance. It's strange that he would ask for it." That detail, which might have gone unnoticed, caused an internal shock for Sarah. She clearly remembered a family predisposition to certain allergies, especially to shellfish, because her grandmother and mother used to have the same reaction. She concealed her turmoil and asked in a low voice, "Are you sure Mr. Hayes wants shellfish?" "That's what he said, but maybe it's for the guests. Anyway, he's usually cautious and doesn't eat that kind of seafood directly. Sometimes it's just a presentation detail." Isabella shrugged. "You know how these events are, all about impressing partners." Sarah didn't insist. However, that coincidence left her uneasy. She preferred to focus on breakfast, scrambled eggs, hash browns, and coffee, all ready for when Ethan came down. But that little thorn of similarity with her own family remained. Could it be a mere coincidence? A couple of hours later, as Sarah was finishing setting the table, she saw Ethan descending the stairs with a serious expression. He was wearing a light gray suit and was intently reading some documents. A crease in his forehead indicated tension or fatigue. When he smelled the coffee, he smiled slightly. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. That smells delicious." "Good morning, sir. The coffee is freshly brewed. Here are eggs and hash browns if you'd like." Sarah discreetly placed the plate near him. He set the papers aside and sat down. He took a sip of coffee and sighed. "Today is going to be a complicated day. I have a series of meetings, and tonight, that dinner with investors. I need something special, something traditional with a modern touch," as Isabella indicated. "Can you handle that?" "Of course, sir. I have a few ideas already," Sarah replied, her mind already racing through recipes. Ethan nodded, looking down at his documents, though for a moment he seemed to want to say something more. Sarah waited, but he simply thanked her for breakfast and left. It was then that she noticed again that small medallion in the inner pocket of his jacket. It looked quite old, with a blurry figure she couldn't quite make out. She couldn't take her eyes off that detail that made her heart race. After clearing the table, Sarah went to the kitchen and found Frank, the family's chauffeur, a cheerful man of about 50 who always had a joke ready. They greeted each other with a friendly nod. "Mrs. Sarah, how was the first day? Getting used to the routine here?" She shook her head, smiling gently. "I'm just starting, Frank. Everything is very different from what I'm used to, but the people are kind, and the kitchen. Don't even get me started. It's huge." Frank let out a friendly laugh. "Well, get ready, because Mr. Hayes is demanding. But look, he's had chefs who don't last a week. Not because he's rude, but because his events are stressful. Let's see if you can handle it." "I hope so," Sarah shrugged, trying to appear confident. As they talked, Isabella reappeared with a list in her hand. "Sarah, here are the ingredients we need for tonight's dinner. We're going in the SUV to buy them. Could you come with us to the market so you can pick what you need?" Sarah nodded immediately. She was happy at the idea of getting the traditional herbs and spices she was eager to use. The three of them, Isabella, Frank, and Sarah, left in the mansion's SUV for a market that was a bit more mainstream, not as upscale as the stores in Beverly Hills, but with fresh, quality products. The drive wasn't long. Upon arriving at the bustling market, Sarah felt like she could finally breathe air that was closer to her reality. Between haggling and friendly greetings, she selected fresh cilantro, savory, and thyme. She also got some freshly made sourdough bread and some ingredients to prepare sliders. While choosing, she took the liberty of explaining to Isabella the importance of each seasoning. "The taste of America is recognized in every detail," she explained enthusiastically. "With these ingredients, you can make diners feel like they're in their grandmother's kitchen." Isabella seemed interested in Sarah's stories, in how she learned to cook from her mother, and how she kept an old notebook with family recipes. However, Sarah avoided mentioning that she had been holding on to tormenting memories for years. Her voice would occasionally break when she thought of the baby she couldn't raise. She forced herself to stay in the present, to focus on her new job. She understood that she couldn't stand by idly with so many coincidences, but she didn't dare to pry further into Ethan's private life. The day progressed, and with it, the certainty that this simple job as a chef was destined to reopen deep wounds and bring to the surface secrets that Sarah never imagined facing so directly. That afternoon, the mansion was bustling with activity. Cleaning staff, assistants, and even a florist arrived to get everything ready for the important dinner. In the kitchen, Sarah reviewed her preparations with the list of dishes to be made. Her mind was divided. On one hand, the excitement of demonstrating her skills. On the other, the uncertainty of what she was suspecting. As she selected herbs for the marinade, her hands trembled. Isabella's comment about Ethan's shellfish allergy and the strange presence of that medallion, with every passing minute, the idea that he could be the son she gave up for adoption grew stronger. She approached the kitchen window for a second, from where she could see the garden. There, in the distance, she observed Ethan talking with a man in a dark suit, apparently a partner or a friend. His proud posture and the gesture of bringing his hand to his chin took her back to another distant memory. Her own father used to make that same gesture. "Are you okay, Mrs. Sarah?" inquired Frank, who had entered the kitchen silently. "You seem to be lost in thought." Sarah was startled and chose to play it off. "Yes, it's just that I'm planning the sequence of dishes for the dinner and I don't want to make any mistakes." Frank smiled at her kindly. "Don't worry, I'm sure you'll do great. Besides, you know how Mr. Hayes is. If the first impression was good, he'll trust you." Sarah nodded, grateful for the words of encouragement. However, as soon as the chauffeur left, she sank back into anxious thoughts. The issue wasn't just doing well in the kitchen, but what to do with the doubt that was consuming her. Did she have the right to investigate Ethan's past? Was it right to think he was her son based on a few coincidences? A memory invaded her mind with startling clarity. When she was 20, she was left without a job and without the support of her baby's father. Pregnant and without resources, she ended up in a public hospital. A social worker encouraged her to give the baby up for adoption so he could have a better life. In tears and with a broken heart, Sarah left a single possession she considered valuable, a small St. Christopher medal, trusting that this divine protection would always accompany her son. Since then, she had lived with the longing to know if that child grew up healthy, if he was loved in another family. Many times she imagined meeting him by chance, but she never dared to look for him. As she marinated the beef in a savory liquid, she thought, "And if it really is him? What would I do? With what right would I burst into his life? Maybe he's happy with his adoptive parents and doesn't need anyone else." The fear of rejection chilled her to the bone. Besides, she felt her job security was uncertain. If she made a mistake or caused a problem, Ethan could fire her without a second thought. The afternoon wore on, and with it, the dinner preparations were in full swing. Sarah forced herself to keep her mind focused on creating the menu. She started with an appetizer of crab cakes to avoid using other shellfish, given the allergy risk, and followed with a creamy mushroom soup. The main course was a filet mignon in a peppercorn sauce, accompanied by sautéed vegetables. Finally, an apple pie with a cheddar crust and a light berry sauce. It all sounded sophisticated but carried the essence of American cooking that Sarah loved so much. As the clock neared 8 p.m., the guests began to arrive. Elegant suits, conversations in English, restrained laughter. Ethan received them in the spacious main living room, along with a partner who turned out to be his best friend, Mark Thompson. Sarah watched them out of the corner of her eye, noticing how Mark seemed more extroverted and confident, while Ethan maintained a more formal demeanor. When it was time to serve dinner, Sarah put on her best apron and instructed the waiters on the final details. Place the peppercorn sauce on the table just as the filet is about to be served. Don't forget to garnish with fresh parsley and very finely chopped shallots. That's what will give it the traditional touch. She felt a slight relief when the service began without a hitch. From the kitchen, she could hear murmurs of approval. The people seemed satisfied. One of the waiters returned with a smile. "Ma'am, they loved the sauce. They say it's something different and very authentic." She breathed a sigh of relief, focusing on the dinnerware and the presentation of the desserts. Almost at the end of the evening, Ethan approached the kitchen to congratulate her personally. "Mrs. Johnson, the dinner was a success. My guests were surprised by the balance between traditional and modern in your dishes. I'm impressed." Sarah perceived a hint of warmth in Ethan's voice, a tone she hadn't noticed before. She lowered her head modestly, hiding the wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Thank you, sir. I do my best to mix the recipes I learned at home with the demands here. Keep it up, because this is exactly what I was looking for to make an impression on the investors, Ethan added, glancing quickly at his watch. I'd like you to stay in charge of the kitchen for future events. Isabella gave me excellent references for you. Sarah nodded, trying not to show the turmoil these increasingly obvious coincidences were causing her. As Ethan walked away, she noticed him put his hand in his left pocket, right where he kept that mysterious medallion. She swallowed hard, her heart heavy. The mix of pride and pain she felt was so disconcerting. How could she not be moved by the success of a man who was perhaps her own son, and at the same time, fear that everything would collapse if the truth came out? Late into the night, the guests left, and the mansion returned to its calm state. Sarah stayed behind to organize the kitchen. While washing a knife, she noticed the subtlety of the grooves on the handle, as if the tool were new and from an expensive brand. Everything in this house shone, while she carried a past of sadness and hardship. She thought of her daughter Chloe, wondering if she was okay, and also of that lost son, perhaps sleeping in the master bedroom on the second floor, with no idea who she really was. The silence of the kitchen, interrupted only by the dripping faucet, weighed heavily on her soul. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know if she was more afraid that her suspicion was true, or that it was all just an illusion created by her need for redemption. The next day, the atmosphere in the mansion felt different. After the success of the dinner, Ethan had won the trust of several investors, and Isabella looked relieved to see that Sarah had fit in well. However, inside the chef, a constant battle was being waged between the desire to know the truth and the panic of losing everything. It was mid-morning when Sarah, busy chopping vegetables for lunch, was interrupted by Isabella, who entered the kitchen with a worried expression. "Sarah, could you help me? A group of executives from the manufacturing plants Mr. Hayes owns in Arizona are on their way. Apparently, they want to talk about possible staff cuts." Isabella sighed. "Mr. Hayes seems very stressed, and we need to prepare a snack or something simple to offer them." She frowned. The words, staff cuts, resonated painfully with her. Many families could be affected. It wasn't her business, at least not directly, but she was moved to think of the people who depended on those jobs. "Of course, I'll prepare something practical but with a homey touch," she replied, feeling an impulse to support Ethan in any way she could. As she prepared biscuit sliders with pulled pork and coleslaw, Sarah began to reflect on the immense pressure Ethan must be under. She remembered the times when she herself was desperate for not being able to support her baby. He must have felt that same sense of having no way out at some point. Or maybe not, if he was adopted by a wealthy family. Her thoughts intertwined with the reality of her current life. She felt that, in some way, she wanted to rescue him, but she knew it wasn't that simple. A few hours later, footsteps and voices were heard in the adjoining room. The executives had arrived, and Isabella was organizing the meeting agenda. Sarah brought the tray with the sliders, chips, and sweet tea. She discreetly placed the food on a side table and stayed on the sidelines, but close enough to hear fragments of the conversation. "Yes, Mr. Hayes, international competition is outpacing us. It will be necessary to close certain plants," one of the executives said in a grave tone. "I understand, but hundreds of workers depend on us," Ethan replied, his voice firm. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She felt admiration upon realizing he wasn't an insensitive businessman. At that moment, Ethan looked at her briefly and gave a tired smile. She bowed her head in a sign of respect and quietly withdrew. That slight interaction was enough for her to realize that, despite being a serious and successful man, he had an empathetic side that shone in his eyes. When the meeting ended, the executives left, and Ethan remained alone in the room. Sarah, who was passing by with the intention of taking the empty plates, found him sitting with his elbows on his knees, a look of deep reflection on his face. She hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate to approach, but she gathered her courage. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked in a soft voice. He straightened up and, for a moment, seemed to hesitate whether to share his concerns with the chef. "I'm just thinking about the responsibility I have. If I had a less radical way out, I'd like to save those jobs." My adoptive father always told me that a true leader cares for his people. But the financial situation is complicated. Sarah felt a lump in her throat upon hearing the word adoptive. She hadn't expected him to mention it so openly. She forced herself to maintain her composure. Sometimes the best solutions appear when you remember why you started everything. How long have you owned those factories? Ethan frowned, surprised that she would ask him something so personal, but he noticed her genuine interest. They were an inheritance from my adoptive father. He built them up with a lot of effort. He came from a simple family. He was a very hard-working man and always instilled in me the importance of roots, of remembering where we come from. He stopped suddenly, as if he had exposed too much. Sarah swallowed hard, her thoughts swirling. A simple family. Roots. How far does all this go? Suddenly, she felt she couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. Fearing her voice would break, she quickly gathered the plates with a swift motion. "Excuse me, sir. I must get back to the kitchen," she murmured before leaving. She went up the stairs with light steps and entered her service room, a small but clean and tidy space. There, clutching the notebook where she wrote her recipes, she let out a sob. She felt cornered by a whirlwind of coincidences that all pointed to the same conclusion. However, she still didn't know how to proceed. She spent the rest of the afternoon with a distant look in her eyes. Ethan's words about his adoptive father and the idea that he knew he was adopted gave her hope that it might not be so impossible to talk to him about the subject. But it also terrified her that he might reject her completely or think she was seeking some kind of financial gain. As night fell, Sarah looked out a hallway window at the moon high above. She remembered how her grandmother used to tell her stories about the moon as a witness to secrets and longings. Could it be the same moon that had witnessed Sarah's tears when she left her baby at that hospital? A part of her wanted to go up to Ethan's room and confess everything at once, but prudence and fear paralyzed her. Around midnight, she knelt by her bed and prayed in a low voice. She prayed for strength, for wisdom, and for the opportunity to find the right moment to reveal the truth. It was a pressure that pushed her relentlessly, but she still didn't dare to take that final step. She fell asleep with a heavy heart, feeling that the internal clock of her conscience never stopped ticking to the rhythm of a secret that could not be kept hidden for much longer. The day dawned silently in the mansion. It seemed that the frantic activity of the week had given way to a truce. Sarah left her room and found the hallway deserted. She went straight to the kitchen, where she set about preparing a light breakfast, coffee, fruit, and some pancakes with syrup for the few employees who were in the house. As she fried some bacon, her cell phone rang. She checked the screen. It was Joan, her closest friend and confidant, who lived in San Diego. Sarah, with a smile mixed with nostalgia and relief, answered. "Joan, it's been so long." Joan's voice came through clearly, full of warmth. "Oh, my dear friend, I was just thinking about you. How are you doing at your new job?" Sarah looked around to make sure no one was listening. She lowered her voice and, in a burst of sincerity, blurted out some of her suspicions. "You won't believe this, Joan, but I think the owner of the house might be my son, the one I gave up for adoption all those years ago." A dense silence formed on the other end of the line until Joan spoke with concern. "Are you sure, Sarah? How can that be?" "There are too many coincidences. The shellfish allergy, an old medallion, certain expressions that remind me of my family. Besides, he knows he's adopted. He mentioned it accidentally, and I feel a connection I can't explain." "Oh my God, Sarah. And have you told him anything?" "No, I'm terrified," Sarah whispered, the confession tumbling out. "What if he rejects me, Joan? After all this time, I don't know if I could bear it. What if he thinks I'm only here for his money and fires me?" Joan's voice on the other end was firm, cutting through the static of Sarah's fear. "Listen to me. That boy, now a man, deserves to know his own story. And you, Sarah, you deserve peace after carrying this for 35 years. Don't let fear steal this chance." The call ended, but Joan's words resonated within Sarah, silencing the chorus of her doubts. It wasn't about finding one more clue. The coincidences were already overwhelming. It was about finding the courage. The job, the mansion, Ethan, this wasn't a coincidence. It was a reckoning. And for the first time, she felt ready to face it. The opportunity presented itself sooner than imagined. That same afternoon, Ethan appeared in the kitchen looking for Sarah. "Mrs. Johnson, excuse me for bothering you, but I need to speak with you for a moment." He looked worried, with his lips pressed tight and his gaze somewhat lost. "Yes, sir?" Sarah wiped her hands on her apron. Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to get into personal matters, but Isabella mentioned that you are very close to your family and that you've had difficult times in the past. Well, I've been thinking about my own roots. My adoptive mother is sick, and I don't know how to handle it all, especially with the company's problems." Sarah felt her chest burn. Joan's words echoed in her head. He deserves to know. She was about to confess everything right then and there, but she held back when she saw the man's distress. "I'm very sorry about your mother, sir. Can I help you in any way?" "I don't know. Maybe I just need some advice. You have a special kind of strength, as if you've overcome tough trials." Ethan managed a sad smile. "My adoptive mother always told me I would find answers when I dared to face my past, but I never had the courage to look for my biological mother." Sarah felt her legs go weak. Every word from Ethan was like a confirmation of the truth. She bit her lower lip and took a deep breath. "Sometimes, the truth is closer than one imagines," she whispered, her voice trembling. He looked up, surprised by the intensity of her response, and for a moment it seemed he would insist. However, at that moment, Mark, his partner and friend, entered, interrupting the conversation urgently. "Ethan, we need your signature on these documents right now. There's a last-minute change in the—" Helplessly, Ethan followed Mark, leaving her with her heart in her throat. Sarah leaned against the counter, her breathing ragged. She understood that the definitive moment was closer than she had ever imagined. She just didn't know how or when to take that step without everything falling apart. That night, Sarah sat on her bed, her gaze fixed on the small photo of the baby she kept. Although the face was almost indistinguishable, she felt that behind that wrinkled paper lay the greatest love story of her life. Joan's call still resonated in her head. "He deserves to know the truth. You also deserve that peace." With a long sigh, she decided to take a firm step. She took her phone and searched online for the address of the Adoption Records Office. She thought that if she needed documents to prove her suspicion, she would have to request them. She was filled with determination, although fear pulsed in her chest. She was no longer a scared young girl. She had faced adversity and raised her daughter Chloe. Now, at 55, she understood that life doesn't always give second chances, and she was not going to waste hers. Before falling asleep, Sarah felt that although her feet still trembled on the edge of the unknown, she was determined not to turn back. The next day, she would wake up with a new purpose: to look for proof, plan her words, and prepare to tell Ethan that the person he hired as his chef could in fact be the biological mother he thought was lost forever. Thus, the hesitant decision she had postponed for so long seemed to be finally materializing. The early morning found her with silent tears, a mixture of nostalgia and hope. Life sometimes presents unexpected paths, and Sarah was about to discover if that path would lead her to reconciliation with her past or to losing, once again, the son she had never stopped loving. The local farmers' market was bustling with activity that morning. Stalls of flowers, spices, and fresh produce competed for the attention of customers walking through the aisles. Sarah had insisted on going to buy some fresh ingredients for the week's menu and, in the process, distract herself a bit from the tension that overwhelmed her. To her surprise, Isabella agreed to let her go alone, although she recommended caution when choosing vendors. As she walked down a corridor crowded with boxes of vegetables, Sarah noticed a woman with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a worn but clean floral apron. She was in front of a small stall of dried herbs and fine spices. Her lively eyes seemed to know the hidden stories of anyone who approached. As Sarah was specifically looking for some quality rosemary, she stopped to ask. "Good morning, do you have fresh rosemary?" Sarah inquired, holding her tote bag. The woman examined her with a friendly smile. "Of course, dear. I've been selling all kinds of herbs to chefs in this area for over 40 years. How much do you need? Sarah took the bundle the woman handed her and noticed the penetrating aroma of the rosemary. It smelled almost like her childhood. Suddenly, the vendor, whose name tag read Mrs. Davis, looked at Sarah with interest. You have the face of someone who cooks with heart, eh? She commented in a conspiratorial tone. I bet you like to preserve family recipes. Sarah nodded, somewhat moved. She supposed any traditional cook would say the same, but she perceived in Mrs. Davis a special kind of intuition. Yes, ma'am. I learned to cook from my mother, and for me, food is love. Were you also a chef, Mrs. Davis? Mrs. Davis let out a little laugh. Years ago, dear, I worked in many big houses in this area. I met wealthy people, but I also saw everything. Secrets, sadness, joy. And I learned that you don't just cook dishes, but stories and emotions. Sarah felt a tingling in her stomach. Those words reminded her of her own situation. She dared to confess, without giving details, that she was currently working in a mansion and facing a very big personal dilemma. Sometimes I don't know if I should speak up or stay quiet. I'm afraid that if I tell the truth, I might ruin everything, she explained in a low voice to prevent other customers from hearing. Mrs. Davis tilted her head, curious. Secrets are like the heat of a chili pepper. If you keep them too long, they can burn you from the inside. But if you find the right way to use them, they can give a unique flavor to life. But you have to know when and how to add them. She took Sarah's hand and squeezed it. Listen to your heart. It will tell you if it's time to reveal what you're hiding. The warmth in Sarah's eyes threatened to turn into tears. It was impressive how the wisdom of that stranger moved her. She said goodbye with a sincere thank you and put the herbs in her bag. Before she walked away, Mrs. Davis passed her a small piece of paper. My phone number, in case you want to talk one day without being in such a hurry, dear. I don't know why, but I feel that our stories are more alike than you think. Sarah saved the paper, feeling that she might have found a mentor or at least a sympathetic person in the midst of her confusion. She left the market with her hands full of ingredients, but above all, with a heart a little lighter. Upon arriving at the mansion, she ran into Isabella, who was reviewing some invoices in the living room. How did it go? The housekeeper asked in a friendly voice. Very well, I found some quality products. With these herbs, I'll make a roast chicken that I want to propose for the next meal with the investors, Sarah replied, showing the bag. Isabella nodded and informed her that Ethan would be out for the afternoon, visiting one of his plants with Mark. The mansion would be quieter that day. Take the opportunity to prepare what you need. I'm sure there will be news tomorrow about the decisions Mr. Hayes will make, Isabella explained, shrugging with a worried gesture. I hope it's not bad news, because he's under a lot of pressure with the layoffs. Sarah nodded, thinking of Mrs. Davis's words and the courage she would need to talk to Ethan when he returned. Maybe if she saw him so pressured, she could offer him some advice, or at least let him know he wasn't alone. However, another, deeper fear was added. What if her intervention affected him emotionally in such a way that it made everything worse? Still, she remembered what the old woman had told her. Secrets should be revealed when the heart indicates it. She went into the kitchen and began to prepare the roast chicken. The aroma of herbs and spices transported her to the days when her mother would mix ingredients in a large pot and patiently teach her each step. There's nothing more healing than a dish made with love, dear, her mother used to repeat. At dusk, Sarah placed the prepared chicken in the refrigerator for the flavors to intensify. She sat for a while at the kitchen table, contemplating the darkness of the garden through the window. She thought about the coincidence of having met Mrs. Davis, who appeared at the right moment with the exact words to give her courage. It was as if destiny had given her a guide on this emotional journey. Then she remembered the paper with the phone number. Should she call her soon? Maybe, although first she preferred to clarify her thoughts and be ready for the crucial step, talking to Ethan. The decision was like a thorn in her mind. It hurt, but it kept her focused on her purpose. She went to sleep with the feeling that a new chapter was opening in her life. In her heart, hope beat that with the help of wise people and the strength of the cooking that ran in her veins, she could face the truth she had been guarding for 35 years. And as the night silence enveloped the mansion, Sarah clung to the idea that sometimes life puts the right people in our path at the right time. The day dawned with gray clouds in the sky, a harbinger of a light rain that soon began to fall over Los Angeles. From the window of her small room, Sarah watched the drops slide down the glass, remembering that distant day when, during a heartbreaking storm, she left the hospital without her baby in her arms. A lump formed in her throat, but she forced herself to shake off those thoughts. She was now at a point where she couldn't afford to back down. She put on her apron and went down to the kitchen, where Isabella was already waiting with some news. Mr. Hayes called to say he won't be in the office today. It seems he's taking an impromptu trip to Phoenix to check on one of the plants. He wants us to have a meal ready to go. Something simple because he won't have time to sit down and eat at the mansion. Sarah nodded, trying not to show the emotion that the mere mention of Phoenix produced, the city where one of the main company plants was located. Maybe, just maybe, destiny was still pulling strings for her to take a leap of faith and dare to find out more about her lost son. I'll prepare a chicken salad sandwich with some fruit and a side salad, something he can eat easily on the way, Sarah explained, opening the pantry to look for ingredients. As she cooked, she thought about the words she had exchanged with Mrs. Davis and her call with Joan. Both had urged her not to give in to fear. What would she lose if she dared to openly admit that Ethan was her son? Perhaps her job, her financial stability, and the opportunity to be close to him. But at the same time, if she didn't, she risked losing him forever without having tried anything. Just as she finished preparing the meal, Ethan came down the stairs hastily, carrying a leather briefcase and frowning. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. Is that food ready? I have a couple of hours' drive and a meeting in Phoenix." Sarah hurried to put everything in a thermal container. "Yes, sir. Here you go. I hope you like it. Have a good trip." Before leaving, he gave her a kind look. "Thank you, really. I appreciate your dedication. Your meals have helped me a lot." Then he lowered his tone. "We couldn't talk the other day. About my roots. Maybe when I get back we can. That conversation made me feel a bit of peace, you know." His words moved her so much that she had to force herself not to break down in tears. She simply smiled shyly and nodded. Ethan left, and Sarah felt a whirlwind of emotions course through her body. He wanted to continue the conversation. That was the sign she needed. Later, while cleaning the kitchen, she received a text message from her daughter Chloe. It read, "Mom, I just got my paycheck. Can you visit me this weekend? I miss you." Reading it, Sarah thought about how much her life had changed in just a few days. Before, her only worry was supporting Chloe and paying the bills. Now, she was on the verge of an event that could rewrite her family's history. Suddenly, an idea came to her. Maybe she needed a symbolic act to rid herself of the guilt that had accompanied her all her life. She went up to her room, took the blurry portrait of the baby from the drawer, and a white handkerchief with her grandmother's initials. She looked at herself in the mirror and murmured, "I have to leave my old life of silence behind and face whatever comes." She got up the courage to call Joan. They quickly agreed to meet that same evening at the bus terminal, as Joan was coming to the city on an errand. Sarah told her she needed to see her urgently, and that this time she wouldn't run from the truth. "Do what you should have done so many years ago," Joan urged her. "Close that chapter and open another one full of courage and honesty." Sarah decided to ask Isabella for permission to leave for a couple of hours, arguing that she had a personal matter to attend to. Isabella, noticing the seriousness in Sarah's eyes, agreed without asking too many questions. The afternoon passed slowly, as if time was resisting reaching that moment of liberation. At dusk, Sarah took a cab to the bus station, with the baby's portrait clutched to her chest and the handkerchief tucked into her purse. There she found Joan, a robust woman with a kind face and a compassionate gaze. They hugged for a long time without saying a word, letting their tears speak for them. After a few minutes, they found a secluded corner. Sarah explained how her heart was torn between confessing everything and clinging to the secret. Joan listened attentively, stroking her hand tenderly. "Before you give it to Ethan, give forgiveness to yourself, my friend. Do a ritual, something that reminds you that you are no longer that scared little girl who had no resources. You are a strong woman." Then, Sarah took out the portrait and the white handkerchief. With a trembling voice, she said, "Do you remember when you came with me to the hospital? This handkerchief was my grandmother's. I used it to dry my tears that day. I have lived with fear and shame all these years. Today, I want to release that burden." She walked to a nearby trash can, holding the photo and the handkerchief. For a moment, she seemed ready to throw them away. However, her hand trembled, and she chose to put the photo back in her wallet. Instead, she did let go of the handkerchief, letting it fall gently. "I say goodbye to the guilt," she whispered, "but I can't say goodbye to this memory. I still want to hold on to the hope of reconnecting with my son." Joan hugged her, and together they shared a moment of deep emotion. Afterward, Sarah returned to the mansion with a slightly lighter heart. Although her grandmother's handkerchief was left behind, symbolizing the end of a stage of silence and self-reproach, the portrait was still there, reminding her that there was an unbreakable love that still united her with that 35-year-old man who might be her own son. The rain had stopped, and the moon was visible in the sky. Sarah felt that with that small step, she had left a part of her past where it belonged, opening up space in her life for the truth she would soon reveal. The next morning, Ethan returned from his trip to Phoenix with an expression of fatigue, but also some serenity on his face. It was around 10 a.m. when he entered the kitchen, where Sarah was preparing a chicken noodle soup for lunch. He took off his jacket and placed it on a chair. "Good morning. How is Phoenix, sir?" Sarah asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "You could say it went well. I spoke with some of the plant managers and got a first-hand look at the economic situation. It's not easy, but it's a relief to know there are solutions if we act with a clear head," he explained, running a hand through his hair. "And I had the opportunity to see some places that reminded me of my family. I'm adopted, but I grew up learning the meaning of hard work and humility." Sarah felt a lurch in her chest. She sensed that he was opening up more and more frankly, as if seeking a mother's advice, without knowing who she really was. "I'm glad, sir. Would you like a bowl of soup? It's just ready." "Yes, thank you." Ethan sat at the kitchen table, something unusual for him. "Sometimes being here relaxes me more than the main dining room, which is so formal." Sarah served the soup and sat at a certain distance, ready to listen if he needed to vent, and so he did. With his head bowed, Ethan began to speak. "I mentioned that my adoptive mother is sick. I'm worried about her. I feel like I don't have enough time to manage the company and take care of her. She insists that I look for my biological mother, that I shouldn't carry that resentment or emptiness. She has always told me that, but I never listened. Now that she's frail, my conscience is bothering me." Sarah pressed her lips together. She wanted to confess right there that she was his mother, to tell him that she never stopped loving him, but an intense fear held her back. So, she simply offered advice that came from the depths of her experience. Sometimes the family you think is lost appears when you least expect it or when you need it most. And you have to be prepared. She paused, avoiding his gaze. "If your adoptive mother has encouraged you to look for yours, maybe you should listen to her. And above all, forgive yourself if you hold any wounds." Ethan's eyes clouded over slightly. He nodded as if those words gave him comfort. "Yes, I know. Maybe it's time to take that path again." Then he smiled again with an apologetic gesture. "Excuse me if I'm being too personal, Mrs. Johnson. I feel like I can talk to you about things I wouldn't even tell Mark." Sarah shook her head, trying to hold back tears. "Don't apologize, sir. I'm honored that you trust me. My mother taught me that sharing pain makes it more bearable." Ethan finished his soup in silence, and then, as if a great weight had been lifted, he stood up with a calmer air. He said goodbye and went to his office. Sarah, for her part, was left with her heart on fire from the closeness of that conversation. She realized that she had already entered a special world, as if she were immersing herself in the intimacy of Ethan's life. It was no longer the simple dynamic of employer and employee. It was a deeper bond. In the afternoon, the mansion received a decorator whom Ethan had hired to remodel some rooms. Sarah took advantage of the confusion to explore the less traveled corners of the house, not out of malicious curiosity, but to try to understand Ethan's life. In a secondary room, she found a shelf with several books on gastronomy and American history. Maybe he's more interested in our roots than he lets on, she thought with a slight smile. In another corner, she discovered a display case with old photographs. Ethan, as a child with his adoptive father, a man with a hard-working and kind face, the adoptive mother in a traditional dress, smiling tenderly. There was also a photo of Ethan at his university graduation. Sarah ran her fingertips over the glass, feeling a poignant longing to have been present at that special moment. "I couldn't watch you grow up," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. In the hallway, she was startled. She stood up and found Isabella, who appeared looking for some papers in an adjacent file cabinet. "Are you all right, Sarah? You look a bit pale," the housekeeper observed with a hint of concern. "Yes, I was just distracted looking at the photos. They're very beautiful," she replied, trying to sound casual. Isabella made a gesture of understanding. Ethan has always valued his adoptive family. He was a very loved child, although he always said he felt a void from not knowing his origins. "I'm glad to see him more relaxed these days." Sarah smiled with a lump in her throat. "Yes, I'm glad too. He's a good man." That day, as she turned off the kitchen lights and went up to her room, Sarah understood that she had taken an irrevocable step in her relationship with Ethan. She was no longer just the efficient chef. She had become a confidant and moral support. The special world she found herself in confronted her with the memories and longings that had accompanied her for decades. She felt the moment of truth approaching, and although the fear persisted, something inside her told her to keep going, for him and for herself, regardless of the outcome. The sun appeared with intensity after several days of rain. The light illuminated the mansion's hallways, giving it a less solemn air. Sarah woke up earlier than usual, restless but determined to continue with her plan. She would be aware of Ethan's movements, waiting for the right moment to tell him the truth. However, before that, she wanted to get a document that would irrefutably confirm her suspicions. Upon returning to the mansion, she found a tense atmosphere. Several employees were running from one side to another. Isabella approached her immediately. "Sarah, a group of foreign partners arrived earlier than expected. Mr. Hayes is in his office attending the meeting. I need you to prepare a quick lunch, something light but presentable." Sarah reacted quickly, heading to the kitchen. She took some vegetables, chicken, and pasta to improvise a healthy and elegant dish. While she was chopping the ingredients, Frank, the chauffeur, entered with his usual friendly attitude. "Everything okay, Mrs. Sarah? Because it seems like everyone is on edge today." "Yes, Frank, it's a hectic day. Do you know what the meetings are about?" she asked without stopping her knife. "Something about a merger with foreign companies. They say it could impact several plants in the country. Mark is the main promoter of that idea, but Ethan is worried about the social impact." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. She remembered the conversation she had with Ethan about the staff cuts and his adoptive father's legacy. Clearly, the dilemma continued. She finished preparing the chicken in a light cream sauce and ordered a couple of waiters to take it to the boardroom. Then she stayed in the kitchen, waiting for the diner's reaction and attentive in case she was called. A few hours later, Ethan appeared at the doorway. He didn't look as tense as before, but he was visibly exhausted. "Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Johnson." It was very well received. Then he looked around to make sure no one else was there. "I feel like I'm at a crossroads. Mark insists that this merger is the quickest way out of the crisis, but I'm not convinced. There are people who have supported me from the beginning. I can't just abandon them like that." Sarah felt the urgency to encourage him to follow his instincts. Every word he spoke convinced her more that he was a noble man, the son of her blood and her heart. "I understand, sir. My mother used to say that sometimes the easiest option is not always the right one. Maybe it's time to take the hard road to do things right." Ethan looked at her with gratitude. "Your words give me strength. When I talk to you, I remember certain advice my adoptive mother used to give me. Never forget where you come from. Why do you remind me so much of her, being so different?" He laughed, somewhat embarrassed by his own reflection. "Maybe it's the warmth in your way of seeing life." Sarah didn't know how to respond without giving herself away. She lowered her gaze, feeling the heat of tears. Instead of blurting out the truth, she simply smiled. You always have to act with your heart, sir, even if it hurts. He nodded and said goodbye. When he left, Sarah sighed deeply, understanding that living with this new challenge was not easy. Every day that passed, she felt more weight on her shoulders, but also more conviction that, at the right moment, she would do the right thing. In the meantime, she had to prepare herself and hold on to the certainty that love and truth, however difficult, always find a way to come to light. The evening breeze refreshed the mansion's spacious garden. Sarah, after an exhausting day, decided to sit for a few minutes on a stone bench near a fountain. She watched the clear water cascade down, trying to calm her troubled mind. It was then that she heard footsteps and turned to see Isabella approaching. "Sorry, Sarah, I didn't mean to startle you. Can I sit with you for a bit?" the housekeeper asked with a faint smile. "Of course, Isabella, sit down." Sarah moved over a little to make room for her. They sat in silence for a few seconds, watching the sunset. Finally, Isabella spoke. "I've noticed that Ethan trusts you a lot. It seems to help him to talk to you in these difficult times. He barely tells me anything about his worries. It seems he sees you as, I don't know, someone who listens from the heart." Sarah felt a blush of emotion. Although she couldn't confess the truth, she was grateful that Isabella noticed the connection. "I try to be there when he needs to vent. Maybe I don't have an education or great achievements, but I know how to listen." Isabella sighed, looking at the horizon. "My husband passed away a couple of years ago. We worked together in another house. He was a chauffeur, and I was a housekeeper, just like now. When he passed, Ethan offered me this job. He may seem tough, but deep down, he's compassionate. He saved me from falling into despair." Sarah perceived that Isabella was not just a demanding boss, but a woman with her own pain. That hint of vulnerability united them in a bond of mutual understanding. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Isabella placed a hand on her shoulder. "Absences always hurt, but they also make us stronger. I also lost someone very important a long time ago, and I feel that now destiny is giving me a chance to rectify." Isabella tilted her head, intrigued. She was about to ask something, but at that moment, Frank, the chauffeur, appeared with his light step and his usual smile. He joined the conversation. "Good evening, ladies. Finally a break, right?" he joked, rubbing his hands. "Do you mind if I join you?" Both shook their heads. Frank sat down with relief. "Hey, I don't know if you've heard the gossip, but I've seen that Mark, Mr. Hayes's partner, is very involved with these foreign investors. I think something big is coming, and honestly, I don't know if it's good for everyone." "I suspect it too," Isabella nodded. "Mark is pressuring him, and Ethan is torn between keeping the plants and finding a more humane solution. It seems there will be tension here." "Exactly," Frank corroborated. "And you know who might be in the middle of all this?" He pointed to Sarah. "The boss's trusted chef. When you feed someone with love, you conquer their heart." Sarah laughed, trying to downplay it, although inside she felt that responsibility. It wasn't just about cooking, but about influencing Ethan's decisions so that he wouldn't forget his roots. However, how could she advise him if she didn't even dare to tell him who she was? After a bit of friendly chat, Isabella and Frank offered to help Sarah with whatever she needed. A team spirit was noticeable. "We know you're reserved, but if you ever need support, we're here," Isabella said firmly. "Families sometimes form in the most unexpected places," Frank added. "And we, the employees of the mansion, are also like a small family. We protect each other." Sarah smiled at them deeply, grateful. She felt that these two people could be her allies in the future if a conflict arose when the truth came out. She got up from the bench and invited them to join her in the kitchen to prepare coffee and some freshly baked cookies. An hour later, the three of them were around the kitchen table, enjoying cookies and steaming mugs of coffee. Amidst laughter and anecdotes from their lives, Sarah felt that she had finally found a point of support. She was not alone. Isabella and Frank, each with their own battles, understood the value of empathy and companionship. At dusk, when they said goodbye to resume their duties, Sarah was left with a warm heart. Not only had she found Mrs. Davis at the market as an external advisor, but now she realized that inside the mansion, there were also sincere people who appreciated her. Maybe when she decided to take the step and confess her secret, she could count on their support. She went to her room, feeling that destiny was bringing her closer and closer to the culminating moment. Every day, the relationship with Ethan strengthened, and her new allies reminded her that not everything was fear and uncertainty. Even in the shadows of her past, there was a light of hope that gave her the strength to believe that despite the obstacles, the love of a mother and her son could flourish, even after 35 years. A cloudy day enveloped the mansion in an air of expectation. It was the designated date for a meeting between Ethan, Mark, and a group of lawyers who would discuss the possible merger with the foreign company. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach, sensing that something important was about to happen. From early on, closed-door discussions were heard in Ethan's office. From the way some lawyers went up and down with tense gestures, the atmosphere felt charged. Sarah tried to focus on her work, preparing a lunch that would showcase American essence: clam chowder, Caesar salad, and grilled steak with roasted vegetables. She wanted to remind Ethan, even if through flavors, of the importance of his roots. Around noon, Mark burst into the kitchen, pushing the door open forcefully and looking around with anxiety. He was a man in his late 30s with dark hair and harsh features, always dressed in expensive suits and with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Is the food ready?" "We have little time." His tone was impatient. Sarah turned to answer calmly. "I'm just finishing the steak, Mr. Thompson. It will be ready shortly." He frowned upon seeing the roasted vegetables on the counter. "Is this what you're serving the foreign investors? Isn't it a bit too simple?" He asked for something classic. "There's nothing more American than this." Sarah held his gaze without being intimidated. "But we need to impress." Mark shook his head. "Ethan is being too sentimental about this whole honoring the culture thing. I want results. If it were up to me, you'd be serving international gourmet food, something sophisticated." Mark's attitude irritated Sarah, but she held back. She remembered that this was the first time she had openly confronted a figure of authority, someone who had so much power over Ethan. With composure, she replied, "True sophistication can also be found in the traditional. Believe me, the guests will appreciate the authentic flavor." He scoffed, shaking his head. "The final word is Ethan's, but I see you have him mesmerized with your grandmother's recipes. Just so you know, I don't want any trouble. Just do your job and don't argue." At that moment, Ethan entered the kitchen, drawn by the loud tone of the conversation. He looked at Mark and Sarah, trying to figure out what was happening. "Is something wrong?" he asked, with a serious expression. Mark stepped forward. "Nothing serious. I was just asking Mrs. Johnson not to serve food that's too down home for our guests. We want to make a good impression, right?" Sarah stood tall, ready to defend her position. "Mr. Hayes asked me for a classic menu that shows our roots. I'm following his instructions." Ethan looked at both of them. His annoyance with Mark's attitude was noticeable, but he took a deep breath to avoid creating a bigger conflict. "Mark, I've already decided. The menu will be traditional American with a touch of elegance. I trust Mrs. Johnson. Besides, I don't have time to argue about these things now. Is that clear?" His partner pursed his lips, visibly displeased, but took a step back. "Fine, you're the boss, as always." With a sharp movement, he left the kitchen. Sarah lowered her gaze, nervous. She knew that Mark had left with a latent resentment that would probably not take long to manifest. Ethan, noticing her unease, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, he's just impulsive like that. He appreciates your food, but he wants to show off in front of the foreigners. I know him. Thank you for staying calm." Before Sarah could respond, he looked her in the eyes. A dense silence formed, as if he wanted to say something more profound. However, he simply smiled with resignation and left. With her heart racing, Sarah understood that she had just experienced her first real confrontation with an adversary in this mansion. Mark not only represented an obstacle in the kitchen, but, in a way, personified the barrier that separated her from Ethan: the economic pressure, the anxiety for success, and the fear that any personal matter could derail the profitable path. After a few minutes, she continued with her task. She finished cooking in silence, but with the firm purpose of not being intimidated. Mark isn't going to kick me out of here. Not before I manage to tell the truth, she told herself. When serving the meal, Sarah stood to one side, discreetly observing how the investors tasted each dish. Despite their elegant appearance and cosmopolitan manners, some of them seemed to delight in the authenticity of the clam chowder and the grilled steak with vegetables. Mark remained silent, with a sour look on his face, while Ethan and the lawyers steered the conversation toward the terms of the possible agreement. Although the outcome of the meeting was still undefined, Sarah left the room with the satisfaction of having defended her cooking and Ethan's vision. She felt that from that day on, she would have to contend with Mark more than once, as he embodied the force opposite to the values she wished to transmit to her son. That thought prompted her to stand firm. Her maternal love was greater than any fear, and nothing would stop her from fighting for Ethan's well-being and that of the families who depended on his company. The next morning started with an unusually cool weather in Los Angeles. The wind blew strong enough to shake the treetops in the mansion's garden, and the atmosphere felt charged with expectation. Sarah woke up early as always, checking the pantry and noting what would be needed for the week. However, the routine seemed accompanied by a tension that had set in after the confrontation with Mark. Isabella entered the kitchen with a serious expression, consulting her planner. "Sarah, today a group of union representatives from the plants are coming. They are going to meet with Ethan to find out what will happen to the workers if the merger goes through. Are you aware of anything?" "I only know that Ethan is very worried. He's under pressure from Mark to close contracts, and at the same time, he wants to protect jobs." Sarah closed the pantry and sighed. "How could we help?" Isabella shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe by preparing a snack and being available if he needs anything. He's going to be busy all day." That same morning, the hustle and bustle began immediately. Frank drove people from the company back and forth, while Isabella multitasked, organizing spaces for the meeting. Sarah, for her part, decided to prepare something simple but comforting for the union representatives: warm biscuits with ham and cheese, coffee, and donuts. She wanted them to feel a cozy atmosphere when they arrived at the mansion, not the distant air that Mark sometimes transmitted. As she kneaded the dough for the biscuits, Sarah was surprised to see Ethan in the kitchen, checking his phone with a tense expression. "Good morning, sir. Do you need anything?" He looked up and forced a smile. "Good morning. I was just passing by to tell you that these representatives will be here in an hour. Could you have some snacks ready?" "Yes, sir, I'm on it. Biscuits, coffee, and donuts. Something simple but traditional." Ethan nodded, visibly grateful. "Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. You're a great help. Today is going to be a long day." With that, he left quickly, as if carrying a whirlwind of thoughts in his head. Sarah felt tenderness, and at the same time, empathy for that man. She knew firsthand what it was like to feel the responsibility for families who depended on you, and now, in this role of chef and silent mother, her desire to protect him became even stronger. Shortly after, the union representatives arrived, men and women with expressions of uncertainty. One of them, named Armando, carried a thick folder with requests and complaints from the workers. The group was received in a large room. Sarah, along with a waiter, placed the biscuits and coffee on a table. As she was leaving, she managed to hear a few words from Armando. "Mr. Hayes, people are very worried. Rumors of layoffs, of plant closures. We need clarity." Ethan sighed. "I understand your anxiety. Nothing is defined yet, but I want you to know that my interest is to keep the jobs. I wouldn't want this plan to affect those who have worked hard for years." Armando and the other unionists exchanged skeptical glances, although some seemed to recognize Ethan's honesty. They settled around the table, starting to eat the biscuits with gestures of approval, and the conversation grew louder, mixing arguments, proposals, and demands. Sarah returned to the kitchen, knowing that this meeting was just the beginning of the trials to come. She took the opportunity to do some cleaning while keeping an ear out. She felt that an important step was being taken that day. If Ethan managed to find a middle ground that guaranteed the continuity of the plants, the families would be protected, and he himself could be free from Mark's pressure. In the mid-afternoon, the meeting was momentarily interrupted, and Armando approached the kitchen looking for a glass of water. Seeing Sarah, he smiled kindly. "Hey, ma'am, your biscuits are delicious. They taste like the ones my mom used to make back home." "Thank you. I'm glad you like them. They're made with dedication." "Do you think Mr. Hayes will really help us save the jobs?" Armando asked with a hint of distrust. Sarah felt an impulse to defend him. "Yes, I believe he wants the best for the people. I've seen him struggle, lose sleep over this issue. It may not be easy, but he's a man with a good heart." Armando reflected for a second, then nodded. "I hope so. A lot of people depend on these plants." At that moment, Mark arrived with a look of annoyance painted on his face. "Armando, let's go back to the room. This isn't over. We need to talk numbers, not sentimentality." Armando gave him a serious look and followed Mark, while Sarah felt a slight shiver. That dichotomy between numbers and sentimentality summed up Ethan's internal struggle, business versus people. And Sarah, in her heart of hearts, knew that her son, although he didn't know it yet, was inclined to protect the people. That was his nature. The meeting concluded at dusk. The Unionists left with a gesture of hope and caution, while Ethan, exhausted, sank into a living room armchair. Seeing him so tired, Sarah approached with a cup of herbal tea. "Thank you." He took the cup with trembling hands. "I don't know if I'm on the right path, Sarah, but I'm clinging to the idea that if I do the right thing, I'll find a way out." She looked into those eyes that reminded her so much of her own mother and pressed her lips together. "Doing the right thing is always a hard path, but you're never wrong." "One is never wrong to think of others," she corrected, careful not to use informal address. He took a sip and, grateful, smiled at her melancholically. Then he got up and went to his office, probably to review documents or talk to lawyers. Sarah picked up the empty cup, feeling a knot of pride and sorrow. The day had brought many challenges: the tense meeting, the latent confrontation with Mark, and on top of that, Sarah's own internal struggle to confess to Ethan the truth about her past. However, hope had also been sown. Ethan's determination and Sarah's sincere concern were signs that, step by step, they were finding a path. The challenge was great, but with each test, Sarah felt her courage grow, and that very soon the time for the great revelation would come. Night fell over Beverly Hills, and the mansion fell silent. Sarah, unable to sleep, sat by her room's window, contemplating the distant lights of the city. The intense day with the Unionists and Mark had left her restless. She put a hand in her apron pocket where she kept the old photo of her baby. Lately, she looked at it more often, as if searching in that almost unrecognizable face for the strength to face what was coming. She remembered how in her youth she was forced to give up her newborn son. Every tear shed, every feeling of helplessness, all of it had marked her forever. Now that life was putting that boy, now a man, in front of her, she was filled with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. How to approach him without demolishing the world he had built? How to ensure he wouldn't feel hatred or rejection? The next day, after sleeping for only a couple of hours, Sarah decided to clear her mind and went to the market again in search of ingredients for the weekly menu. When she reached the herbs section, she recognized the figure of Mrs. Davis, the elderly woman with gray hair who had advised her once. She felt an impulse to approach her. "My dear, it's been days since I've seen you here. How is everything?" the woman asked kindly. Sarah forced a smile. "Complicated, Mrs. Davis. I'm trying to find the right moment to reveal a secret that could change everything." The old woman tilted her head sympathetically. "We already talked about secrets, remember? Keeping them for too long burns the soul, but saying them hastily can do harm. The problem is, I don't know if he's ready to hear it. He has his own life, his people, and I don't want to ruin it." Mrs. Davis carefully caressed a bunch of dried herbs. "Who says you're going to ruin it? Maybe he needs that truth more than you can imagine. Sooner or later, the truth comes out, dear. If you feel such a strong inner calling, why do you hesitate so much?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm terrified of the word rejection. I feel that if he rejects me, it will hurt more than all the suffering of my past. But it also hurts me to see him struggle with problems that I feel I could help alleviate if he knew who I am. Maternal love is strong. You will know the moment. Mrs. Davis concluded, looking at her sweetly. But don't take too long. Life is short. Sarah paid for her herbs and said goodbye. As she returned to the mansion, she reflected on the old woman's words. There was a huge moral dilemma. Helping Ethan meant opening her heart and confessing her true identity. But every time she imagined him asking, "Why did you abandon me?" she felt like she was breaking inside. Still, a little voice reminded her that silence was also a form of deception. When she arrived, she ran into Isabella, who told her in a low voice, "Ethan is in the office with Mark. I think they're arguing again. You can hear muffled shouts. What's going to happen now?" Sarah feared that the issue of the merger and the layoffs had intensified. Cautiously, she approached the adjacent hallway, and although she didn't want to eavesdrop, she heard snippets of the conversation. "Don't be naive, Ethan. These people don't. You either sell or you sink," Mark claimed harshly. "I want to make sure we don't lay off hundreds of workers. If you don't understand that, I'll find another solution." "You think with your heart, not your head. You're going to ruin yourself that way," Mark retorted angrily. Sarah stepped back, feeling torn. There was the cornerstone of the conflict. Ethan was risking his fortune to safeguard the well-being of the workers, while Mark pushed to sacrifice anyone necessary to secure the merger. This tension was also reflected in Ethan's eyes when he sometimes shared his fears with Sarah. She wanted to go in and tell him, "Son, you're not alone." But she was paralyzed. That night, Sarah could barely eat. She locked herself in her room, mentally reviewing what would happen if that deal was finalized on Mark's terms. There would be pain, unemployment, and an irreparable loss of values. And if it wasn't finalized, maybe Ethan would lose the solvency to maintain the company. This dichotomy led her to an even deeper internal conflict. Her son was about to make decisions that would affect thousands of families and define his future as a businessman, and she, his biological mother, remained silent, not daring to intervene. Mrs. Davis's words rumbled in her head. Sooner or later, the truth comes out. She curled up in bed, hugging the photo of that baby she never stopped loving. She cried quietly, feeling that guilt and love were suffocating her equally, and she understood, with a glimmer of courage, that only by facing that fear could she help Ethan see beyond the numbers and pressures. But first, she had to overcome herself and the guilt ingrained in her heart. The following days flew by with a growing tension in the mansion. Ethan received incessant calls from investors, while Mark hounded him with documents and proposals. Sarah tried to support him with dishes that reminded him of the warmth of a home, and he thanked her dedication with tired smiles. But one afternoon, the news that shook the hornet's nest arrived. The foreign conglomerate had set a deadline for signing the agreement. There were only 2 weeks left for Ethan to decide whether to accept the merger, with all its implications, or to reject it definitively. Immediately, the atmosphere became heavy with a new gravity, as if an hourglass was beginning to run out. "If we don't sign, we'll lose the investment and could go bankrupt in less than a year," Mark announced in a flash meeting, his voice crisp. "Are you willing for that to happen?" Ethan, pale, listened in silence, his gaze lost on the faces of the lawyers who nodded with concern. Sarah, from the kitchen door, felt that this scene was the prelude to imminent chaos. How to save the plants without the injection of foreign capital? How to maintain jobs if the company isn't restructured? That night, as Sarah was cleaning the kitchen, Ethan approached and asked her for some tea for his insomnia. Worried, she took the opportunity to ask him in a low voice, "Is everything all right, sir?" "No, Sarah, it's not." Ethan let out a sigh. "I feel like I'm at a dead-end crossroads. They're giving me 2 weeks to sign or reject the agreement. Mark keeps telling me it's the only way to save the company, but I couldn't sleep knowing there will be mass layoffs. And at the same time, what if I don't sign and everything sinks?" Sarah noticed the despair in his voice. An impulse shook her from within, to confess the truth, to hug him, to tell him that his biological mother was there with him. However, terror silenced her again. She only managed to put a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, when you think there's no way out, a new idea emerges. Don't give up. "I'd like to believe that," he rubbed his eyes. "I really would, but I feel so alone in this." Those words pierced Sarah's heart. She saw him so vulnerable and knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. However, before she could say anything more, Ethan managed a sad smile and left for his office. The next morning, the mansion was in an uproar. Mark had organized a meeting with the top executives to push the decision. Sarah, seeing the comings and goings of executives in suits, began to prepare a light menu that included coffee, fresh water, and some appetizers. Around noon, one of the executives entered the kitchen looking for something to drink and commented aloud, "The merger is almost a done deal. Mark is gaining ground. I hope Ethan understands it's the only option." Sarah's stomach clenched. If the merger was closed Mark's way, what would happen to the workers? And beyond the professional, what would happen to Ethan? Perhaps he would sink into the guilt of having betrayed the ideals inherited from his adoptive father. Unable to help it, Sarah went out to the patio for a moment to get some air. She needed to calm down. There, in a corner of the garden, she found Isabella, who also looked distressed. "It hurts me to see Ethan so overwhelmed. I feel that if he accepts the deal with the foreigners, he'll always regret it. But at the same time, I understand that rejecting it could ruin him financially," Isabella said with a sigh. "This seems insurmountable," Sarah admitted, looking at the gray sky. "Sometimes I wish I could help him see things from another perspective, but I don't know how to do it without causing him more confusion." Isabella looked at her with concern. "Are you referring to something personal, Sarah? I don't know what secrets you're keeping, but I've noticed it hurts you to see him like this. If you need support, Frank and I are here." Sarah felt a comforting warmth, remembering she was not alone. However, that dilemma was something she had to solve herself. Upon returning to the kitchen, her mind continued to spin. If Ethan knew I was his mother, maybe he would feel less alone, she thought. But the obstacle that seemed insurmountable was the possibility that he would reject her or that the situation would explode just when he most needed concentration to save the company. That afternoon, she received a message from her daughter Chloe, who asked to see her over the weekend. Sarah realized that she was also neglecting her younger daughter, absorbed in the story with Ethan. She promised to call her later, although her heart was divided between two families that, in the end, were part of the same blood. As night fell, everything was more tense than ever. Ethan secluded himself with his lawyers, and Mark came out triumphant with a look of superiority. Sarah knew, without needing to hear it, that the ultimatum was just around the corner. She felt a shiver. Perhaps the real obstacle was not the merger, but her lack of courage to face the truth she was keeping. Only with that clarity could she guide Ethan toward a decision that honored his roots and the love that united them, even though he didn't know it yet. The day dawned with a radiant sun, as if nature wanted to counteract the tension that inhabited the mansion. Sarah woke up with renewed determination. After so many days mired in doubt, she decided she would take a step toward the truth. Maybe it wouldn't be the full confession, but she needed to find an opportunity to get closer to Ethan on a more personal level. Mid-morning, while organizing the pantry, she heard Frank, the chauffeur, call her attention. "Mrs. Sarah, Mr. Hayes wants you to accompany him to a gourmet supermarket. He wants to review some products for the upcoming events. It seems he needs your advice." Surprised, Sarah wiped her hands and went to the living room. There was Ethan, in his impeccable suit, reviewing some papers. Seeing her, he managed a shy smile. "I need to make a special purchase for a meeting with potential investors, but this time, I want a more traditional spin without losing quality. I thought you could help me choose the best ingredients." "Of course, sir. It will be a pleasure," Sarah replied, feeling a pulsating excitement at the possibility of going out alone with him. Minutes later, they were both in the SUV with Frank at the wheel. The journey was quiet, and although they didn't talk much, the atmosphere was less formal than that of the mansion. Upon arriving at the gourmet supermarket, Ethan and Sarah walked through the aisles filled with fine products, imported olive oils, exotic spices, artisanal cheeses. Sarah explained the differences in quality and how to combine certain flavors with traditional dishes. "Look, sir, this rosemary infused oil could give a special touch to American dishes, mixing gourmet with our essence," she commented with a sparkle in her eyes. He nodded, interested. "That sounds good. I want to surprise these potential partners, but without losing my American identity." He let out a sigh. My adoptive mother used to say that the flavor of our culture should not be sacrificed to please outsiders. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She wanted to take that moment to confess that her own mother had instilled the same teaching in her, and that those teachings came from the same root, but she didn't dare. However, the connection was undeniable. After filling the cart with some select ingredients, they went to the checkout. While waiting, Ethan saw a small child running through the aisles with his father. The child tripped and almost fell, but the father caught him and hugged him. A wave of nostalgia crossed Ethan's face. Sometimes I think about what my early childhood was like. I have no memories of my biological mother, and I wonder if she would have loved me like that too. Sarah felt her throat close up. She decided to say something that would at least give him hope. I'm sure she did. A mother always loves her son, even when life separates her from him. He stood there, processing those words. The line moved forward. They paid for the products and returned to the SUV. On the way back to the mansion, Ethan opened the window to let the breeze cool the interior. Sometimes I feel that if I knew who my mother was, I would have the strength to face my problems. As if there's a piece of me missing that I need to find. Sarah held back a sob. Those words were both a gift and a stab at the same time. With the firmest voice she could manage, she replied, "A family, even when separated, remains connected. Maybe that piece you feel is missing is closer than you think." Ethan turned to look at her, intrigued, as if he perceived a special nuance in her voice. However, he didn't inquire further. He simply nodded and looked out the window, thoughtful. Somehow, that small conversation felt like a partial victory for Sarah. It was the first time she had offered him, in a veiled way, the possibility that his biological mother had really loved him and continued to love him. Although she hadn't made the great revelation, she felt that a ray of hope was breaking through. Back at the mansion, they unloaded the bags in the kitchen. Sarah began to review the ingredients while Ethan went to his office. Before disappearing down the hall, he turned back. "Thanks for today. I know it sounds strange, but talking with you eases my soul." Sarah was left looking at him with tenderness. "It was a pleasure for me too, sir. You know you can count on me." He left, and she sighed deeply, allowing herself a few seconds of pure emotion. Although the business situation remained critical, and the deadline for the merger was fast approaching, that day they had had a small personal victory. It was a bittersweet moment. Sweet because Ethan was showing more and more closeness. Bitter because the truth was still a secret that burned inside her. Still, in that faint flame of hope, Sarah saw the possibility of a reconciled future, where mother and son would recognize each other and together face the challenges that threatened to divide their paths. The eve of the big business decision arrived, wrapped in an atmosphere heavy with urgency. 2 weeks had passed like a sigh, and now Ethan had to sign or reject the agreement with the foreign company the next day. The mansion was buzzing with lawyers reviewing the final points, while Mark kept reiterating that this was the only viable option. Sarah felt the tension could be cut with a knife. From the kitchen, she organized a light dinner for all the executives present: soups, bread, and fruit. It wasn't a time for banquets, but for offering something comforting to calm the nerves. Isabella and Frank, aware of the heavy atmosphere, walked around with worried faces. Towards dusk, in a moment of calm, Isabella sat for a moment with Sarah in the kitchen. "How do you see it?" the housekeeper asked, stirring a cup of tea. "Ethan seems on the verge of collapse. Mark is pressuring him relentlessly." Sarah let out a long sigh. "I don't know what he's going to do, but I trust that he will find a way not to sacrifice so many workers. He's not insensitive." Isabella nodded with a serious gesture. "Sometimes I think he needs a very powerful personal reason to make the right decision, and yet he seems to feel very alone in this." Sarah perceived in those words a reminder of her own responsibility. She could be that reason, if she dared. But the question still hurt. Is he ready to know that I'm his mother? Am I ready to face his reaction? That night, just before 9 p.m., most of the lawyers left with exhausted faces. Mark secluded himself in a guest room to prepare the final documents. Ethan, on the other hand, was left alone in his office. After finishing the cleaning, Sarah felt the impulse to bring him a tea or coffee, something to show her support. She took a breath and knocked gently on the door. "Come in," came Ethan's dull, tired voice. Sarah entered with a tray containing a chamomile tea and a couple of homemade cookies. On the desk were mountains of papers, and Ethan's face looked somber. Seeing her, he managed a half smile. "Thank you, Sarah. You're an angel." He took the cup and took a sip. She gathered her courage. "Sir, tomorrow is the deadline, right?" He nodded, putting the cup aside. "Yes, tomorrow I'll have to sign or reject, and I don't know if my decision will be the right one." He ran a hand through his hair. "I feel trapped. My adoptive mother is still sick, and I don't want to bother her with these issues. She just told me to trust what my heart tells me, but that's easy to say and hard to do when there's so much money and so many lives at stake." Sarah felt a deep desire to hug him. She approached a little closer, cautiously. "Sometimes following your heart is the only thing that can give us peace. You have always shown that you care about people. Why doubt yourself now?" Ethan rested his elbows on the desk and covered his face with his hands. "Because I'm afraid of failing. Afraid that everything will go down the drain, and that in the end, it won't have been worth it." He slowly lowered his hands, looking at her with eyes full of sorrow. "I'm also afraid of being left without knowing who I really am. I don't have the strength to look for my biological mother right now, and I feel like I'm missing something important about myself." Sarah pressed her lips together to hold back the tears that threatened to flow. This is the moment, she thought. But as she opened her mouth, the doorbell rang in the mansion. She stepped back as if startled. Ethan frowned. It was probably Mark, expecting a messenger with documents. He got up with resignation. "Excuse me, Sarah." She stood there, mute, nodding. The moment was broken, and the silence became an abyss. With the tray in her hands, she left the office and went to the kitchen. There, she leaned against the wall, trembling with emotion and frustration. They were so close, but again, an interruption had prevented her from telling the truth. After a few minutes, Frank entered with a tired face. "Sarah, are you okay? You look very pale." She tried to regain her composure. "I'm fine. It's just that the situation is overwhelming me. I'm worried about Mr. Hayes." Frank sighed sympathetically. "We all are. Tomorrow will be decisive. But I believe in him. He wouldn't be the man he is if he didn't bet on doing the right thing." Left alone, Sarah reflected. The time had come. If the signing was to be the next day, she had to be prepared for whatever came, whether it was a mass layoff, bankruptcy, or a deal that went against her convictions. And in the midst of it all, her secret throbbed with force. The real dilemma was to confess and risk being rejected, or to remain silent and live with the guilt of having left Ethan without the maternal support he so desperately sought. The night passed with Sarah wide awake. She thought of her daughter Chloe, of the family she didn't have with Ethan, and of the promise she made to herself to seek the truth. She concluded that whatever happened the next day, she would face her fear. She had to do it for him, for herself, and for the bond that was still alive despite the 35 years of distance. With this resolution, she closed her eyes in the early morning, seeking the necessary rest for the most difficult test that would come with the first rays of the sun. The morning dawned with a clear sky that contrasted with the accumulated tension inside the mansion. All the staff were on high alert. That day, Ethan had to sign or reject the agreement with the foreign conglomerate. The decision would define the course of his empire and the future of the plants that employed hundreds of people. From early on, the hustle and bustle of lawyers and partners gave the residents an almost claustrophobic air. Sarah got up before sunrise, feeling her nerves on edge. She went to the kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast, aware that no one would have much of an appetite. As she stirred a pot of hot oatmeal, her hands trembled. She thought about the conversation she had had with Ethan the night before. They were so close to the truth, and yet so far. At 8 a.m., Mark entered with a hurried step, his face marked by impatience. Without greeting, he took a glass of water and blurted out, "Everyone get ready. In less than 2 hours, the people from the foreign company will arrive to finalize the details. Ethan has to sign, no matter what." Sarah maintained her composure, Although the arrogant tone of that man angered her inside, she simply nodded, not giving him an opening for discussion. Minutes later, she saw Ethan pass by in the hallway on his way to his office. His face was a poem of exhaustion and doubt. He was dressed in a dark suit that highlighted his paleness. Sarah felt a pull in her chest. She needed to talk to him before he made the final decision. Taking advantage of a moment when the house fell into relative silence, she prepared a strong coffee and headed to the office. She knocked gently on the door. "Come in," said Ethan's muffled voice. Upon entering, Sarah found the young entrepreneur sitting in front of a pile of folders. On the table was a long contract with numerous marked pages. He looked at her with a brief smile. "Thanks," he murmured, seeing the coffee. "I need something to wake me up." She left the cup within his reach. She felt the tension suffocating her, but she gathered her courage. "Mr. Hayes, can I talk to you for a minute?" He nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Of course, Sarah, what is it?" She hesitated. She wanted to confess the truth, that she was his biological mother, and that she understood the magnitude of his sacrifice, as years ago she had no choice. However, Ethan looked on the verge of collapse. Would it be wise to drop such a revelation at that moment? "I just wanted to remind you of what your adoptive mother always told you, to listen to your heart. Sometimes you think you should act out of convenience, but you might end up with something worse, remorse." Ethan listened to her intently. He seemed moved, but just then his cell phone rang. He looked at the screen, frowned, and answered the call with a gesture of apology, indicating to Sarah that it was something urgent. She understood that the moment was lost again. She said goodbye in silence and left, feeling as if an invisible force was pushing her away every time she tried to be sincere. Moments later, the foreign representatives arrived, 2 men and a woman in elegant suits, with tense smiles and briefcases full of paperwork. Mark received them effusively, almost pushing them into the main living room where the lawyers were waiting. Sarah, hiding her anxiety, made sure there were plenty of snacks and drinks. The great confrontation erupted when everyone finally took a seat around a large table. Ethan, serious, reviewed the contract while the visitors explained the final conditions. Mark, at his side, nodded at every word, pressing for it to be signed without hesitation. In a corner, Sarah and Isabella watched from a distance. No one else seemed to notice the presence of the employees. However, they felt the tension up close. "Mr. Hayes, as you can see, Clause 7 establishes the restructuring of the less profitable plants." The foreign woman pointed to a paragraph in the document. "Naturally, that implies staff cuts in at least 2 or 3 locations." Mark intervened with an affable tone. "Exactly, sir, but don't worry. It's standard in mergers of this type. After an initial adjustment, the company will emerge stronger." Ethan pressed his lips in a line of disgust. "Have concrete figures been established? How many employees would lose their jobs?" The lawyers remained silent. Mark let out an impatient sigh, wishing the process would conclude. It was clear that he wasn't concerned about the layoffs. The only thing he saw was the seal that would validate the contract. Ethan leafed through the pages slowly, as if his conscience weighed a ton. Finally, with trembling hands, he took the pen. An overwhelming silence fell. Sarah felt her heart beat so hard it almost hurt. Before signing, Ethan's voice broke slightly. "I want to understand why we can't propose a transition plan that ensures fewer layoffs." The foreign woman shrugged. "Because the current market demands flexibility. Reducing the workforce is part of modernization. It's what has to be done to compete." In a corner, Sarah wanted to scream, "Don't do it, son. There's another way." She put a hand to her chest, her eyes full of tears. The whole mansion held its breath as Ethan looked down. However, just when it seemed he was about to sign, a spark of rebellion flashed in his eyes. "I need a moment alone," he announced, leaving the pen on the table. "Excuse me, but I won't sign anything until I'm certain it's the right decision." The reaction was immediate. Mark looked at him with contained fury. The foreigners were perplexed, while Ethan left the room with a determined stride. Sarah knew the battle wasn't over. The great confrontation was, above all, with himself. and perhaps with the truth she still didn't dare to reveal. Sarah found Ethan in the mansion's backyard, breathing heavily. He had a furrowed brow and his hands in his pockets. Hearing her steps, he turned slowly, showing an expression between anger and anxiety. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but I need some air. My head is going to explode," he confessed, bringing a hand to his temple. She approached cautiously. "I understand. Do you want me to prepare something for you, or do you prefer to be alone?" Ethan shook his head, trying to manage a smile. "Your presence calms me. If you don't mind, stay for a moment." So they stood there, under the gentle sun, while the chirping of birds contrasted with the whirlwind inside Ethan. After a few seconds, he dared to speak. "You know, I always thought that if I had the opportunity to expand the business, I would do it without hesitation. But now that I see the human cost, I can't stop thinking about my adoptive father, about what he would do. He came from a humble family, and always instilled in me the importance of taking care of the people who support you." Sarah perceived a tremor in his voice. She felt a deep empathy, although she carried a greater weight. She not only knew about Ethan's adoptive family, but also about the true bloodline that united them. "Following what he taught you is following your own roots, sir. That legacy is yours. It defines you as a person." Ethan looked up with a thoughtful expression. "And at the same time, the thought of losing everything torments me. I feel that if I don't sign, the company could collapse. Many people also depend on me not to go bankrupt. Sarah recognized in his desperation the wound of that child who had lived without knowing his biological mother, a child who sought guidance in his adoptive figure, a guidance that now seemed absent. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "You are not a fragile man. You are strong. Think about how you built this company up after your adoptive father's death, or how you have overcome obstacles before. Maybe it's not the signature that will give you stability, but the conviction that you are doing the right thing." He paused, observing her, his eyes reflecting contained emotion. "Sarah, why do you speak to me with such certainty? Sometimes I feel that you know me better than many people in my circle, as if you know something about me that even I don't understand." She swallowed hard. It was the perfect opportunity for the confession. Her heart screamed at her to speak, but her throat closed up with fear. She felt a tremor that she could barely conceal. "I've just learned to read people, and you are someone who values truth and sincere affection, even if you sometimes find it hard to express it." Silence enveloped them. For a moment, Ethan seemed ready to inquire further, but a voice was heard in the distance. Mark was calling from the terrace, urging him to return to the meeting. Ethan sighed in frustration. "I need a little more time. They can't demand that I sign an agreement of this caliber without being sure of my own limits." He looked at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and despair. "I feel like a coward for postponing it, but I can't betray what I believe is right." Moved, Sarah took his hand without thinking twice. It was a maternal gesture, wordless but full of meaning. They stayed in contact for a few seconds until he carefully let go. "Thank you," he murmured, turning to leave with Mark and the foreigners. As she watched him walk away with a firm step, Sarah was left with her emotions on edge. She understood that Ethan's reflection was sincere and profound. However, she suspected that without a real push, the pressure of numbers and the threats of bankruptcy could lead him to sign against his conscience. The rest of the morning, the atmosphere remained tense. Mark tried to convince Ethan that there was no alternative. The lawyers were silent, fearful. Isabella and Frank watched the scene from a distance, worried about the imminence of the signing. Time was running out, and every minute without a signature increased the annoyance of the foreigners. In the kitchen, Sarah felt short of breath. She repeated to herself that she couldn't keep waiting for a perfect moment to tell him the truth. Maybe Ethan's decision would be strengthened if he knew he had a maternal bond in the mansion, a real, biological, and powerful bond that, in some way, gave meaning to his social sensitivity and his tendency to protect the workers. But the question kept hammering in her mind. Was she ready for rejection if it came? Or did that intimate gesture of holding hands mean that Ethan, without knowing it, already recognized her as an almost motherly figure? The hours passed like an hourglass, ever slower and more agonizing. Sarah understood that the final confrontation was very near. The only way to come out on top would be to face what she had been postponing for years. With her heart pounding at a frantic pace, she decided that that very day, before the final decision, she would find Ethan alone and tell him everything, no matter what happened. He deserved to know the truth and, with it, find the strength he so desperately needed not to betray himself. Midday was approaching, and the sun bathed the mansion's walls in its light, creating a contrast with the shadows that loomed inside due to the imminent decision. The discussions between Mark and the foreign representatives grew louder, while Ethan maintained an increasingly eloquent silence. Sarah, determined to reveal her identity, awaited the opportune moment. She knew she couldn't do it in the middle of lawyers and partners. She needed a moment alone with him. She had an idea to ask Isabella for help to create that opportunity. "Isabella, I need to speak with Mr. Hayes urgently, but I don't want to interrupt his meetings. Do you think you can let me know when you see him step out for a moment?" The housekeeper perceived the urgency in her eyes. "Of course, Sarah. I've noticed you're more anxious than usual. Is everything okay?" "I hope so, Isabella. Just trust me. And thank you for your support." After a while, Isabella approached stealthily. "He's on the second-floor balcony. He's alone. I think he took a break to breathe. Go now." Sarah went up with her heart galloping in her chest. Upon reaching the balcony, she found Ethan with his back to her, contemplating the city view. On a nearby table, his cell phone lay silent. He seemed lost in thought, his shoulders tense. Sarah swallowed and approached with slow steps. "Sir," she called him in a low voice. He turned, startled. Seeing her, a look of relief appeared on his face, and he rubbed the back of his neck. "Sarah." "Yes. What is it? Did something happen?" She stopped, standing a little less than a yard away from him. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she felt a lump in her throat. "Yes. What's happening is that I have something very important to tell you, something I've kept silent about for a long time, but I can't hide it anymore." Ethan's gaze filled with curiosity and concern. "What do you mean?" The moment had arrived. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering every moment of pain, every tear, and how it had all led to this decisive minute. With a trembling voice, she began, "I know this is hard to believe, and I didn't plan for things to happen this way, but I am your biological mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at her, dumbfounded, unable to utter a word. Sarah, with her eyes welling up, continued, "I was 20 years old when I gave you up for adoption. I was alone, with nowhere to live and no way to take care of you. It was the most painful thing I've ever done." She took the blurry photo of the baby from her pocket. "I've kept this as proof of a past I could never get over. When I came to this house and saw that you had the same allergy as my family, that you wore a medallion identical to the one I left with my baby at the hospital, I knew it was you." Ethan's expression was a whirlwind of shock, disbelief, and emotion. He took a step back, his breath ragged. "Are you saying?" "Yes," Sarah affirmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I am the woman who gave you life, and I ask for your forgiveness. Forgiveness for not having been there, for not having looked for you sooner. I don't know how you'll take it, but at least I needed you to know." A tremor shook Ethan, and he leaned on the balcony railing to keep from losing his balance. He brought a hand to his chest, where he kept the famous medallion he always wore. He took it out slowly, looking at the ancient figure of St. Christopher imprinted on it. "This medallion," he whispered. "My adoptive mother told me they found it with me. I never imagined that the person who would have given it to me worked in my own house, cooking, being near me, without my knowing." Sarah nodded, dissolved in tears. I know it's hard to assimilate, and I understand if you get angry, if you reject me. But I had to tell you, son. I couldn't keep lying." The word son resonated in the air. Ethan trembled, covering his face with his hands. A muffled sob was heard, and after a few seconds, he lifted his head. His eyes were wet, full of anger, pain, and deep down, a spark of relief. "Why?" he asked, his voice broken. "Why didn't you look for me sooner?" Sarah closed her eyes as if it would help her find strength. I was afraid you would hate me, that you would think I only wanted your money. But seeing you fight for your values, seeing you so, I felt I had to do the right thing. I knew it as soon as I saw you, Ethan. I knew it was you, and I have lived with the guilt every day." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, processing everything. A long silence ensued. Then, without taking his eyes off Sarah, he murmured, "I always thought my biological mother had forgotten me, that she didn't love me. I felt resentment for that. But seeing you here, knowing what you've done for me these days, it confuses me so much. I don't know what to feel now." Sarah's tears intensified, and she took a step forward cautiously. "I understand. I don't want to pressure you. You can take all the time you need. But I wanted you to know the truth before you made any important decisions in your life, because I will be here to support you, if you'll let me." Ethan's hand trembled as he extended it, almost without realizing it, and touched Sarah's. A shiver shook them both. Suddenly, the balcony seemed to come alive with a respectful silence, as if the world had stopped to witness that reunion. An embrace didn't come yet, but the tension dissipated a little. "I feel confused, hurt, but also relieved," he admitted. "I always wanted to know who my biological mother was. I never thought she was so close, and that she could actually love me." Sarah felt a mixture of joy and sorrow flood her heart. She didn't venture to hug him without his permission, but the warmth of his hand joined to hers was enough to seal a moment that would change their lives forever. After the shocking confession on the balcony, Ethan and Sarah remained there for a few minutes, their hands intertwined. Neither was ready for a more forceful gesture. Reality was overwhelming them. However, the maternal bond emerged in every glance, in every shared tear. In the midst of the emotional whirlwind, the sound of a cell phone brought them back to the present. Ethan took it out of his pocket and saw Mark's name flashing on the screen. He cut the call and put the phone away with a tense gesture. "Mark is desperate for me to sign the contract. I suppose he won't be long in coming to look for me," Ethan said, carefully releasing Sarah's hand. She, feeling the absence of his touch, tried to remain calm. "Whatever you do, I'm here. You don't have to do it alone." He nodded and looked around as if searching for a way out. It was clear he was still in shock from the revelation of his true mother, but he was also aware that the business decision could not wait. With a trembling sigh, he dared to ask, "Sarah, can I call you something else? Mom? I don't know if I'm ready, but—" The question moved her to tears. She took a step closer, moved by Ethan's tenderness and confusion. "Son, you don't have to if you don't feel sure. But if it ever comes from your heart, for me, it will be the greatest gift." She looked at him with affection. "I truly understand." He nodded, feeling a great relief and at the same time an emotional overload that was difficult to manage. There was no time to fully process it. Mark's call interrupted again, insistent. Ethan answered this time. "I'm coming," he said dryly, hanging up immediately. Sarah watched him. She needed to give him a final piece of advice. "Ethan, your adoptive father instilled in you values that you have always defended, and now you know that your biological mother is also here supporting you, with the same love. So you are not alone. Follow your heart." Ethan managed a brief, melancholic smile. "Thanks, Mom," he pronounced the word carefully, as if savoring a word he had always dreamed of saying. "I'll try." Sarah felt her chest would explode with emotion. Before he left, she dared to touch his arm, a maternal gesture. He looked at her for a second, grateful, and left with a firm step. She remained on the balcony, tears streaming uncontrollably, but a glow of hope illuminating her. When Ethan returned to the meetings, Sarah went down to the kitchen to compose herself. There she found Isabella, who saw her with a tear-streaked face. Alarmed, she approached. "Sarah, what happened? Are you okay?" Sarah wiped her face, feeling she could no longer keep the secret. "Isabella, I just told Ethan that I'm his biological mother." The housekeeper's eyes widened. Then, moved, she hugged her warmly. "Oh my God, Sarah, I knew you were hiding something important, but I never imagined this. How did he take it?" "He's overwhelmed, but he didn't reject me." Sarah's voice broke. He said, "Thanks, Mom. Can you imagine what that means to me?" Isabella nodded, moved. "It's incredible. I'm so glad you finally dared. And now?" "Now," Sarah sighed. "Now he needs to decide on the contract, but I trust that he won't do it by betraying himself." Isabella held her by the shoulders, offering her a handkerchief to dry her tears. "Count on me for whatever you need." Soon after, Frank joined the conversation, restless. "Hey, Mark is going crazy, calling everyone to resume the signing. It seems the foreigners are losing their patience. Do you know if Mr. Hayes has decided yet?" Sarah exchanged a significant look with Isabella. "I don't know, Frank, but I think that whatever happens, Ethan will have the strength to face the consequences." Meanwhile, in the main living room, Mark was handing out copies of documents, urging the lawyers to speed up the review and pressuring the foreign partners not to leave. In his mind, everything was almost concluded. He expected Ethan to sign, period. However, the entrepreneur was still absent. Every minute that passed generated more tension. Ethan, for his part, was in the office, his hands on the desk, breathing hard to calm himself. He had received a huge emotional blow. He had just discovered that Sarah was his biological mother, the secret that had haunted him his whole life. A cascade of memories and sensations clouded his mind. Sarah's words resonated within him. "You are not alone. Follow your heart." His eyes fell on a photograph with his adoptive father. There he was, holding him as a child, with the sun setting behind them. He remembered how he taught him to ride a bike and talked to him about the importance of honesty. He then felt a torrent of determination. He grabbed the photo with a trembling hand, put it in his inner pocket, and walked out with a decisive step. In the hallway, he crossed paths with Sarah, who looked at him with anxiety. He gave her an intense look, a mixture of respect and tenderness. He didn't speak, but she understood that he was about to face Mark and the investors. She stepped aside to let him pass, holding her breath. Minutes later, everyone was gathered in the room. Mark raised his arms in a sign of triumph when Ethan entered with the contract folder. "Finally, let's sign once and for all. Time is pressing." The foreigners, with impatient faces, also demanded an immediate closing. The lawyers prepared to witness the act. Isabella and Frank observed from the door in silence. Sarah, a few steps away, was breathing with difficulty, aware that this was the decisive moment. Ethan, serene but with a racing pulse, opened the folder and prepared to speak, knowing that at the end of his words, nothing would ever be the same again. With everyone gathered in the main living room, the atmosphere was one of maximum expectation. Mark could hardly contain his impatience, and the foreign investors exchanged tired glances. Ethan, standing before the table, took a pen and cleared his throat, imposing silence. "Thank you for your patience," he began in a firm voice. "I know it may seem like I've taken longer than usual to sign this contract. I want to thank Mark and everyone who has worked on this merger. However," he paused, tensing every muscle in the room. Sarah, in the background, felt her heart beat as if it were going to burst out of her chest. Ethan took a deep breath. "However, I cannot sign these terms as they stand. I am not willing to endorse a mass layoff, nor to close plants that support so many families. I respect your proposal, but I want to review every clause to ensure that the employees are affected as little as possible." Mark let out an incredulous snort. "Are you kidding, Ethan? We've been at this for weeks. You have no room for soft negotiations. The foreigners are not going to accept changing the structure." One of the foreign representatives tilted his head. "Indeed, our deadline has expired. For us, this document is already closed. Either you sign or we withdraw." Ethan clenched the pen between his fingers. "If that is your position, I regret to inform you that there will be no deal. I will not sell my conscience or condemn so many families to unemployment. I can face bankruptcy if necessary, but I will not be responsible for something that goes against my principles." The shock was immediate. Mark stood up abruptly, slamming his palm on the table. "Are you crazy? Do you know what this means? You will sink, and the company with all your employees exactly what you wanted to avoid." The foreigners also stood up, collecting their things with expressions of annoyance. One of them, before leaving, tried a last haggle. "This is your last chance. Think about it." Ethan, sweating but with a determined look, shook his head. He didn't say another word. Seeing that he wouldn't budge, the investors headed for the door, huffing. At that moment, silence took over the room. Mark turned to Ethan with rage. "You're a fool. You just ruined months of work." He threw some papers on the floor. "I don't want to carry the burden of your bankruptcy. I'm leaving." He went after the foreigners without bothering to pick anything up. An incredulous murmur spread among the lawyers and some partners who had witnessed the scene. Slowly, they began to disperse. Isabella and Frank, on the other hand, remained on the sidelines, looking at each other with faces of relief and concern at the same time. In the end, Ethan was left standing alone. Sarah decided to step forward, approaching him cautiously. She saw how the tension on his face was mixed with a strange serenity. She took a breath and spoke in a soft voice. "You did what you thought was right." He nodded, letting the pen fall onto the table. "People will say I'm crazy. It's likely my company will suffer, but I couldn't sign. You understand?" He looked at Sarah with eyes full of a silent plea. She understood everything. She took another step, and this time she had the courage to put her arms around him. She hugged him cautiously, fearing his reaction. Ethan, after a moment of hesitation, returned the hug, letting out a sigh that seemed to have been held in for months. "Son, I'm proud of you," Sarah whispered, risking the use of that term in front of whoever was present. He nodded, resting his forehead on her shoulder. He didn't say a word, but the trembling of his body showed a mixture of relief and release. After a couple of minutes, they separated, still with wet eyes. "Thanks, Mom," Ethan murmured, no longer caring about hiding it. Some employees had seen the scene from a distance, and Isabella and Frank looked at each other, moved. Their faces showed joy and surprise at the same time. Sarah, with tears on her cheeks, caressed his face. "Don't be afraid. I know there will be difficulties, but you are not alone in this. You are a man of integrity. I will accompany you." Ethan nodded, and something in his posture showed a definitive transformation. He was no longer that insecure and tormented entrepreneur. He had made a costly decision in financial terms, but one consistent with his convictions, and besides, he had found his biological mother in an act of honesty that shook his entire life. At that moment, one of the lawyers more loyal to Ethan than to Mark approached with a timid voice. "Sir, I think we still have options. We can look for domestic investors, renegotiate loans, diversify. It's not the end of the world. It may not be easy, but there are paths." Ethan looked at him with renewed hope. "Thank you. We will try." Sarah felt her heart beat with force, but this time not of anguish, but of joy. The moral reward had been fulfilled. Ethan had not betrayed his values or his humanity. And in doing so, he had reconciled with a crucial aspect of his identity. The maternal love he had always longed for, now finally revealed. The room fell silent, with papers scattered on the floor and a different air, as if a great weight had been lifted. No one knew exactly what would happen the next day, but everyone agreed that something important had changed. As he hugged Sarah once more, Ethan understood that even in uncertainty, truth and love give an unsuspected strength to move forward. The following days were a delicate dance of discovery. The mansion, once a place of secrets, became a space for fragile, emerging truths. There were quiet breakfasts where Ethan would ask about her life, about Chloe, about the grandmother he never knew. There were also moments of awkward silence, of unspoken questions hanging in the air. Sarah learned to navigate his shifting moods from the quiet relief of having found her to flashes of deep-seated pain for the years they had lost. Isabella and Frank became silent guardians of this new dynamic, ensuring mother and son had the space they needed, their respectful distance, a testament to the family that was slowly, carefully, being rebuilt within the mansion's walls. The morning sun bathed the mansion in a warmer light than usual. It seemed like a sign of renewal after the stormy previous day. In the kitchen, Sarah silently checked the pantry. For the first time in a long time, her mind was not solely focused on her culinary tasks. Her heart beat with a different rhythm, full of emotions she could barely process. Only a few hours had passed since Ethan refused to sign the contract with the foreign investors, ending weeks of tension. And not only that, the truth of her relationship with Sarah had finally been revealed. The consequences were yet to unfold, but the entire house felt that something fundamental had changed. "Sarah, are you okay?" Isabella asked gently, approaching her. She noticed her companion's distracted expression. "If you need to rest, don't worry. We can handle things here." Sarah looked away from the spice tins and smiled thoughtfully. "Thank you, Isabella. I'm at a point I never imagined. On one hand, I feel light, as if a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. On the other, I'm filled with uncertainty about what's to come now that Ethan knows I'm his mother." Isabella nodded sympathetically. She took a clean cup and filled it with coffee. "I know Ethan. He's a fair and sensitive man. I think the simple fact that he called you Mom yesterday shows that he wants to build something with you. But I also know he'll feel vulnerable. He lived for 35 years with one idea of his origin, and now everything has changed in a flash." As they drank coffee, the murmur of the house felt different. Without the presence of Mark or the foreign investors, the atmosphere was less dense. However, an echo of tension remained, because many workers feared for the economic situation after the breakdown of the agreement. Still, Sarah noticed that several employees addressed her with kinder looks, as if they had understood the importance her position now held in Ethan's life. "It's been a blow to everyone," Sarah commented in a low voice. "The employees are asking if there will be another strategy to avoid closing plants. I'm worried that Ethan will feel guilty if things don't go well." "Well," Isabella pointed out, "he's not completely alone now. There are many of us who believe in him, and in you too." That last phrase touched Sarah's heart. For the first time, she perceived that her role in the mansion went beyond cooking. She was a kind of emotional pillar for both Ethan and the other employees. She sighed, remembering that she also had a younger daughter, Chloe, who had asked to see her. She decided she had to attend to her soon, as she didn't want to neglect her relationship with her amidst this whirlwind. Minutes later, she heard footsteps approaching the kitchen. It was Ethan, dressed more casually than usual in a light shirt and comfortable pants. He looked exhausted, but there was a new peace in his eyes. He stood at the entrance, looking at Sarah with some shyness, as if he needed to figure out how to behave now that he called her Mom. "Good morning," he greeted, nervously running a hand through his hair. Then he turned to Isabella. "Thank you for everything, Isabella. Could you leave us alone for a moment?" The housekeeper caught the hint and nodded respectfully, quietly withdrawing. Now, Sarah and Ethan were alone in the kitchen, the scene that had witnessed so many fragmented dialogues and unsaid secrets. However, this time there were no secrets to hide, at least not between them. "Did you get any sleep?" Sarah asked with tenderness, resting her hands on the work table. "A little. I tried to sort out my thoughts. I have to deal with the consequences of rejecting the contract, find new partners, or an alternative financial plan. There are rumors that some executives will want to resign." He stopped, managing a weak smile. "But even with all that, I feel like I've recovered a part of myself that I thought didn't exist." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. It was the first time she had heard him speak so openly about his past and the impact of their reunion. "Ethan, I'm so sorry for not being in your life," she murmured, barely raising her voice. "I wish things had been different. You're not the only one who regrets it. I also wish I had known everything sooner," Ethan inspired deeply. "But maybe this happened at the moment it was supposed to. Now we have the opportunity to rebuild a bond, even if it's late." As he said this, he stretched out his hand and gently brushed Sarah's fingers on the table. That contact was enough for both souls to recognize each other. Although they didn't melt into a big hug, the warmth of the gesture expressed much more than words. Sarah felt a tingle of love, relief, and vulnerability. She had before her adult son, a man with a whole life built, and at the same time, a child who needed confirmation of affection. "I'll be here for whatever you decide, son." The word son floated in the air with a special resonance. "I won't pressure you into anything, but I would like you to also meet your half-sister, Chloe, when you feel it's the right time. It would be a big step, I know." The proposal seemed to reinforce the reality that Ethan had a biological family he had never known about. He nodded, weighing the idea. I'd like to meet her, although I don't know what my life will be like now with all these problems in the company. But yes, I think it's time to start healing and building. He let out a sigh. Thanks, Mom. That Mom electrified the atmosphere again. Sarah approached, ready to hug him more firmly, and this time Ethan responded with a sincere and prolonged contact, resting his head on her shoulder as if it were the first time he felt safe. Neither of them could hold back their tears. Despite the vulnerability and fears, they felt a new horizon opening before their eyes. During that hug, the air of the mansion seemed to purify, as if the shadow of doubt and guilt had dissipated to make way for a renewed light. It was an intimate and fragile moment, but full of promises. Sarah, with her heart pounding, recognized that the real test was just beginning. She had to face the financial uncertainty that threatened the company, the gossip, the curiosity of people, and above all, the need to forge a real bond with Ethan. Still, for the first time in 35 years, she felt she was not running alone or hiding an impossible burden. Both now shared the same love and the same burden. And if Sarah had learned anything in life, it was that walking with company, especially with a bond as strong as that of a mother and son, makes any path lighter, no matter how steep. A few weeks passed, and slowly, Ethan's company found a new direction. It wasn't easy. Contracts had to be renegotiated, departments restructured, and smaller investments than those from the foreign conglomerate had to be accepted, but they were aligned with the social vision he so fiercely defended. Although the road was uphill, indications showed that the plants were still operating, and mass layoffs were avoided. The local press stopped labeling him as the crazy guy from Beverly Hills and began to recognize that he had taken a risk driven by values uncommon in the business world. In the mansion, the atmosphere became more serene. Mark never returned, and hardly anyone spoke of him anymore. Sarah, at 55, watched in amazement how her life had taken an unthinkable turn, from being the lonely chef carrying a secret to becoming the emotional support of a man who, to her surprise, turned out to be her own son. The mother-son relationship progressed step by step, with stumbles and moments of tenderness. A special day came when Chloe, Sarah's younger daughter, traveled from her town to meet Ethan. The meeting took place on a Saturday afternoon in the mansion's garden. Isabella and Frank were in charge of receiving the young woman, who arrived with nerves and curiosity. Sarah was waiting for her at the entrance with a smile that showed both pride and apprehension. "My dear, welcome," she said, hugging her. "Thanks for coming." "Mom, this is crazy." Chloe looked around, impressed by the scale of the house. "Where is he?" "In the garden. Let's go." They walked down a path of flowers until they met Ethan, who was waiting by a table with drinks and snacks. Seeing him, Chloe felt a tingle. He was her brother, a man with an elegant appearance and a kind face. He managed a nervous smile. "Hi, Chloe. I'm Ethan." "Yes, I know." She let out a little laugh between shyness and relief. "I'm so glad to finally meet you. Mom has told me so much about you." They looked at each other with curiosity, not knowing exactly how to behave. Sarah intervened with empathy. "Relax, there's no hurry. Let's talk, have something to drink. The important thing is that we are together." They sat in garden chairs while the evening light painted the sky with orange tones. Ethan asked about Chloe's life, her studies, her plans. She responded with sincerity, confessing that she felt overwhelmed to discover she had an older brother so different from her everyday reality. Little by little, the conversation flowed and laughter emerged, especially when they discovered anecdotes from childhood that showed common traits. A taste for traditional music, the same allergic reaction to certain perfumes, or the way they moved their hands when they talked. After a while, Isabella and Frank briefly joined them, bringing some small appetizers that Sarah had prepared. The atmosphere transformed into a small family party. No one talked about business or financial problems. The only topic was the joy of being together. Ethan, in a moment of confidence, took his mother's hand and his sister's. "It's been a long road, full of surprises, but I want you to know that despite the lost years, I'm willing to build something solid with you." He looked at Chloe. "I don't know what role as a brother I can play, but I'll do my best." Chloe was moved. "I don't know how this will be either, Ethan, but I'm really looking forward to getting to know you. And, if you'll let me, I'll brag to my friends that my brother is a businessman with solid principles," she joked, making everyone laugh. Sarah felt her soul fill with gratitude. Seeing her two children together, sharing the same space, partially erased the scars of the past. She vividly remembered the day she left the hospital without her baby, in the midst of uncertainty and poverty. Now, in a garden illuminated by hope, she was witnessing her family's reunion, a miracle woven from courage, love, and above all, forgiveness. When the sun finally set, they decided to move to the mansion's living room. There, they talked more calmly. Chloe stayed overnight in a guest room, invited by Ethan so the family could enjoy another day of togetherness. Before they retired to rest, Sarah approached a corner of the living room where Ethan kept an album with photos of his adoptive childhood. He opened it, showing images of birthdays, graduations, and vacations. "I would have liked you to be in these photos," he whispered with a hint of melancholy. "But I know there's no turning back. Now I can see you here, by my side. That's what matters." Sarah, moved to tears, caressed his back. "Your adoptive father and your adoptive mother did a great job with you. I'm glad you received love, even though I wasn't there. Now it's my turn to be present for the rest of our lives." Ethan tenderly hugged his mother, and Chloe, who witnessed it all, understood that she wasn't just seeing a hug. She was witnessing a miracle of healing, the purest act of reconciliation. There, in the stillness of the night, an eternal truth was affirmed. Money can build a mansion, but only family bonds can turn it into a home. This was not the end of a story, but the brilliant opening chapter of a new journey. The journey of Sarah returning to her maternal role, of Ethan rediscovering himself in his core values, and of Chloe gaining a complete family, all of it wove together a future where any adversity could be overcome. Because when you have family as your foundation, you have the strength to face any storm. In that harmony, clear laughter rang out amidst tears of happiness. The mansion's walls, once silent witnesses to secrets and doubts, now seemed to breathe an air of peace and relief. Sarah, Ethan, and Chloe, finally and truly reunited, not just by blood, but by understanding and love. They felt they were on the verge of a new adventure, living the life of a true family. Despite the weight of the past, they had found a way to be reborn from the ashes, proving the simplest yet most profound truth. A mother's love, no matter how silent or long buried, is always the lighthouse that guides her children back home. I hope you truly felt today's story. What does family mean to you? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss emotional journeys like this one. See you in the next video.